She was standing 3 feet away from a plate of food she couldn't touch. Not because she wasn't hungry, she was starving. Not because the food wasn't there, it was right in front of her, half-eaten, still warm. But because asking a stranger for his leftovers required swallowing every last piece of pride she had left. And Elena Brooks had already swallowed so much of it that she wasn't sure there was anything left of her at all. She asked anyway. And that single question, quiet, humiliating, desperate, would destroy the life Landon Ashcroft thought he'd buried himself inside and rebuild something neither of them saw coming. If this story moves you, hit like and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this one goes deep. The cafe was called Birch and Bloom, which was exactly the kind of name that suggested someone had spent more time thinking about branding than about the food. It sat on the corner of Alderman and 5th in the heart of Westbridge, a mid-sized city that couldn't decide if it wanted to be cosmopolitan or small town, and so had settled uncomfortably into something in between. Glass office towers casting shadows over century-old brownstones, artisan coffee shops wedged between laundromats that had been there since 1987. Landon Ashcroft came here on Tuesdays. Not because the food was exceptional, it wasn't. The club sandwich was fine. The coffee was slightly over-roasted. The background music was always something acoustic and vaguely melancholy, like whoever controlled the playlist was going through something personal and hadn't bothered to hide it. He came because it was quiet, because it was 12 blocks from his office tower and nobody there knew his face. Because in a city where his name was printed in business journals and his company's stock ticker ran along the bottom of financial news segments, anonymity was something he had to travel for. He sat at his usual corner table, two-top, window seat, facing the door, and ate alone. This was the Tuesday ritual. Lunch from noon to 1, no phone calls, no emails, no Marcus from his communications team asking him to approve a press statement. Just Landon, a sandwich he never fully finished, and the peculiar relief of being nobody for an hour. He was 32 years old, and he was very, very tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that settles into the architecture of a person, the way grief does when it's been given enough time to calcify. 3 years had passed since Sarah died. 3 years of mornings that started fine, and then, somewhere around the second cup of coffee, became unbearable. 3 years of a house that was too large and too quiet, and filled with objects that had once belonged to a woman who laughed easily and left her earrings on the bathroom counter and made everything feel, against all reasonable expectation, manageable. He ordered the club sandwich. He ordered a sparkling water. He opened the book he was pretending to read, some biography of a railroad magnate that Marcus had given him, insisting it was relevant to something, and he stared at it without absorbing a single word. Outside, November had arrived in the particular unpleasant way it always did in Westbridge. Gray and damp, the wind carrying something personal against it, the trees stripped bare, and the sidewalks littered with wet leaves that stuck to everything. He'd been sitting there for 20 minutes when he noticed her. She was standing just outside the entrance, on the narrow strip of sidewalk between the door and the street, partially sheltered by the cafe's green awning. He noticed her for the same reason you notice something slightly wrong in a familiar room, not because it was dramatic, but because it didn't fit. She was young. 30, maybe. Though something about the way she held herself made her look older, the way people who've been exhausted for a long time sometimes do. She was thin in a way that suggested it wasn't a choice. Her jacket was a faded olive green, one size too large, the collar torn at the seam. Her dark hair was pulled back with something that might have been a rubber band. She had a plastic bag hanging from one wrist, the kind you get at a dollar store, and she was looking through the cafe window with an expression Landon couldn't immediately name. He watched her, idly, the way you watch someone on a train platform when you have nothing better to do. She stepped inside. The hostess, a college-age girl with a ponytail, and the cheerful efficiency of someone on the first half of her shift, looked up with an automatic smile that flickered almost imperceptibly when she registered the woman's appearance. "Table for one?" "No, The woman hesitated. I just wanted to ask something." The hostess waited. "If someone's finished eating and there's food left over, is there a policy about—" "We don't give out leftovers," the hostess said, not unkindly but not warmly either, just factually. A script she'd deployed before. The woman nodded once, quick, like she'd expected it. Okay, thank you. She turned to go. And then, this was the part Landon would think about later, would turn over and over in the way you turn a stone in your hand to understand its weight. She didn't go. She stood there for a moment, her back to the hostess, looking at the dining room, not begging with her eyes, not performing desperation, just standing there, held in place by something that looked a lot like an argument she was having with herself. She turned back around. She looked directly at Landon's table, at his plate specifically. The half-finished sandwich, the untouched second half, the small pile of chips he'd moved aside because he wasn't in the mood for chips. Then she looked up at him, and she said it. I'm sorry to bother you. Her voice was quiet. Not soft. Quiet. The way things go quiet when they're trying not to fall apart. I can see you're not finished. But if you were going to leave that... She stopped, started again. May I eat what you don't finish? The cafe, which wasn't particularly loud, got a shade quieter. Landon looked at her. He thought about several things in rapid succession. The automatic suspicion that arrives with wealth and teaches you to assume angles and motives and inconvenience. The vague social discomfort of a scene. The already complicated business of getting through this Tuesday in one piece. Then he thought about Noah, which he didn't expect. He didn't know why. Maybe because his 8-year-old son had said something 3 days ago that was still lodged in him like a splinter. They'd passed a man sleeping in a doorway on the way to school, and Noah had looked at him for a long moment and then looked up at Landon and said very seriously, Dad, does it hurt? Not having anywhere to go? And Landon had said something inadequate about it being complicated, and they'd walked on, and the question had never quite left him. He pulled out the chair across from him. Sit down, he said. Well, she didn't sit down immediately. She looked at the chair like it might be a trap. I wasn't asking for... She began. I know what you were asking for. He flagged down the server, a young man named Derek, according to his name tag, who arrived looking professionally neutral. Could you bring another menu and a glass of water? Still, not sparkling. He looked at her. Unless you want sparkling. Still is fine, she said. Still standing. Please sit down. You're making me uncomfortable. Something happened in her face then. Not offense, but the ghost of something that might have been amusement. It was so brief he almost missed it. But she sat. I'm Landon. Elena. A pause. Brooks. Are you hungry, Elena Brooks? She looked at him with the particular expression of someone deciding how much honesty the situation called for. Yes, she said. Then order something. She opened the menu and looked at it for a moment. He watched her eyes move across the prices. He watched her close the menu slightly and look up. The soup is fine, she said. I'll just have the soup. Get whatever you want. The soup is what I want. He let it go. Derek came back. She ordered the soup. Then, after a pause, she looked at Derek and said, and maybe the bread, if that comes with it? It does, Derek said. Okay. She handed the menu back. Thank you. Landon watched her put her plastic bag on the floor between her feet, where she could feel it. He understood, without knowing why he understood, that whatever was in that bag was probably most of what she owned. They ate in silence for a while. Or rather, she ate, with the focused, deliberate attention of someone who had not had a real meal in longer than today. Landon ate his chips, which he'd suddenly recovered an interest in. He didn't ask questions. He was aware that questions in this particular situation had the texture of interrogation. She wasn't a charity case to be assessed. She was a person eating soup. But eventually, when she'd gotten through half the bowl and her shoulders had dropped maybe an inch from where they'd been when she walked in, that particular kind of tension releasing when a body finally gets what it needs, she looked up at him. Why did you do that? She asked. Do what? Invite me to sit. You didn't have to. You were standing in the cold. I was inside. Before that, you were outside. You were standing in the cold for a while before you came in. I could see you through the window. She looked at him steadily. So you felt sorry for me. I felt like you were hungry and I had food. It wasn't complicated. Those things are usually more complicated than people say they are. Maybe, he said. How's the soup? She looked down at it. It's really good, actually. Yeah, the soup's the best thing here. Everything else is fine, but the soup is legitimately good. She ate another spoonful. Then, you come here a lot? Tuesdays? Alone? Yes. She nodded, didn't pursue it. He appreciated that. The bread's good too, she said. It is. Another silence, but different now. Less charged. He didn't ask where she was staying. She didn't tell him. They talked about small things, the soup, the weather, the particular grimness of November in a city that had no mountains or coast to soften it. She mentioned she'd grown up in a different part of the state, further south, where the winters were less brutal. She said it without elaboration, without the preamble of story, just as a fact offered into the air between them. He told her he'd grown up here, that he'd been in Westbridge his whole life except for college. Do you like it? She asked. The city? He considered it. I used to. Now it's mostly just where I am. She looked at him. That's a sad thing to say. Yeah, well, she almost smiled. He caught it at the corner of her mouth. When Derek came back to ask if they wanted anything else, Landon ordered coffee. He looked at Elena. Coffee? Tea? Tea, if... Yes, please. He caught her hesitation, the reflexive reluctance to accept. He didn't comment on it. When Derek left, she said, I don't want you to think I make a habit of this. Of what? Of walking into restaurants and asking strangers for their food. I didn't think that. People think a lot of things about people in my situation. She said it plainly, without self-pity but without flinching either. What is your situation? He asked, and then, you don't have to answer that. She wrapped her hands around the tea mug when it arrived. Both hands, the way you do when you're cold in a deep way, not just a surface way. I don't have anywhere to stay right now, she said. I've been at a shelter, but they're at capacity. I've been finding places. A pause. I had a job 3 weeks ago. Lost it. Before that I had an apartment, lost that too. She looked at the tea. It goes fast. When it starts going, it goes fast. He nodded. I'm not telling you this, so you'll feel bad for me, she added. I don't feel bad for you. She looked up. That came out wrong, he said. I mean, I'm not looking at you with pity. I'm just listening. She seemed to weigh this. Okay, she said finally. He thought about her on the drive back to the office. This was, in itself, unusual. Landon Ashcroft was not an ungenerous man. He gave to causes, wrote checks, had his name on a wing of the Children's Hospital, but he was also a man who had learned to move through the world with a certain efficient detachment. You saw a problem, you addressed it in the way available to you, you moved on. Sentiment was expensive and he'd learned to budget it. But something about Elena Brooks stuck. Maybe it was the way she'd asked the question, may I eat what you don't finish? With that specific quality of defeat mixed with determination, like she'd already accepted humiliation and had decided to walk into it anyway because the alternative was worse. There was something in that combination that he recognized from somewhere in himself. From the months after Sarah died when he'd had to keep showing up to meetings and fielding calls and making decisions and existing in the world while feeling like the architecture holding him upright had been knocked sideways. You kept going not because it was easy, but because stopping wasn't really an option. He got back to his office and fielded 3 calls and signed off on 2 acquisitions and sat through a 40-minute meeting about Q4 projections, and underneath all of it, in that background hum where you keep things you're not looking at directly, he thought about a woman with a torn jacket sitting in the cold outside a cafe, arguing with herself about whether to ask a stranger for leftovers. He didn't do anything about it. There was nothing specific to do. He went home at 6:30, which was early for him. Usually, he was there until 8, sometimes 9, working through whatever couldn't wait and a lot of things that could, and found the house the way he always found it, large and too quiet, with Mrs. Hendricks, the housekeeper, preparing to leave for the evening. Noah's upstairs, she said, pulling on her coat. He ate a little. Had a hard time with his reading today. His reading's fine. I know it's fine. He just didn't want to do it. She paused at the door. He asked me today if people can die from being lonely. Landon stopped. What did you say? I said I didn't think so. I'm not sure that was the right answer. She said it gently. He's 8, Landon. He needs more than fine. She left. The house settled into its evening quiet, the particular silence of too many rooms and not enough people. He went upstairs. Noah was at his desk, not doing homework, but sitting with his chin in his hands looking out the window at the November dark. He was a small kid for his age, thin like Sarah had been thin, with her dark eyes and her habit of going still and inward when something was troubling him. Hey, bud. Hey. Landon sat on the edge of the bed. What are you thinking about? Nothing. That's a lot of thinking about nothing. Your forehead does that thing. Noah touched his forehead. What thing? The thing where you get a little line right here. Landon pointed between his own brows. You've done that since you were 2. It means your brain is working overtime. Noah was quiet for a moment, then, Dad, do you think Mom would have liked us still? The question landed the way those questions always landed, sudden and total, like a window opening in the winter. What do you mean? Like, if she could see us now, how we are now. He looked at his hands. We're kind of different than we were. Different how? Quieter, Noah said. We're quieter. We used to be louder. He paused. I don't remember being loud, but I know we were. Landon moved from the bed to the chair next to Noah's desk, so they were level. Yeah, he said. We were. Do you think she'd be worried about us? He looked at his son, 8 years old and already doing the work of adults, carrying grief quietly, trying to make sense of absence. I think, Landon said carefully, that she would just be glad we were still here, still together. Noah considered this. Are we still together? What do you mean? Of course we are. I mean, he struggled to articulate it. We're both here, but sometimes it feels like we're both just kind of next to each other instead of together. Landon sat with this for a long moment. The honest answer was that he didn't know how to argue with it. We're working on that, he said. Okay, Noah said, not entirely convinced. He went back to Birch and Bloom the following Tuesday. He didn't tell himself he was going because of Elena. He went because he always went on Tuesdays. But he arrived 15 minutes earlier than usual, which he didn't examine too closely. She wasn't there. He ate his sandwich, drank his coffee, read 3 pages of the railroad magnate biography, and retained none of them. Left a tip that was probably too large for Derek, who seemed pleased but confused. The Tuesday after that, she was there. Not inside, outside, standing on the corner across the street, the plastic bag on her wrist, watching the cafe with the expression of someone who has talked themselves out of something and is now talking themselves back into it. He was approaching from the opposite direction and saw her before she saw him. He slowed. He had a choice here. He was aware of the choice. He could cross the street at the light, go in, be seated, and if she came in, she came in. He could also acknowledge her, which would make it something deliberate, something with more weight. He crossed toward her. Elena. She turned. She had a moment of pure, unguarded surprise before her expression settled into something more careful. Oh, she said. Hi. You coming in? She hesitated. I wasn't sure. It's cold. Yeah. Come in, he said. She thought about it. Then, okay. I cut. They sat at the same corner table. She ordered the soup again. He ordered the club sandwich and, after a moment, asked Derek to also bring a second order of the soup. I didn't ask you to do that, she said. I know, I wanted some too. She gave him a look that said she knew that wasn't true, but she didn't argue. They talked more this time. Not about her situation. Not directly. She mentioned in passing that she'd been to the library that morning, that she'd been using the library's computer terminals to send applications. Job applications, he understood, though she didn't specify. What kind of work, he asked. Administrative, data entry. I did bookkeeping before things got complicated. But my certifications lapsed. She broke a piece of bread in half. I was also a teacher's aide for 2 years, elementary school. You like kids? Something happened in her expression, a softening that was also a kind of ache. Yeah, she said. I like kids. My son's 8. She looked at him. You have a son? Noah. He pulled out his phone, which he rarely did in this cafe, and showed her a photo. Noah at his last birthday, sitting in front of a cake he'd barely touched, looking at the camera with those dark, serious eyes that he'd inherited from Sarah. Elena looked at the photo for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. He looks like he thinks a lot, she said. Landon put his phone away. Yeah, he does. Is he... She paused. Is he doing okay? Define okay. She looked at him. His mom? He didn't know why he was surprised she'd intuited it. The single father, the photo of a boy who looked like he thought too much, the careful past tense. 3 years ago, he said. I'm sorry. He's managing. He's a good kid. He stopped. He needs things I don't always know how to give him. She nodded slowly. Yeah, she said, like she understood something specific about that. Yeah. This became a thing, not planned, not discussed. But the following 2 Tuesdays, she was there when he arrived, and they sat at the corner table and ate soup and talked. She was not, he became increasingly clear on this, a tragic figure. She was a person in a very difficult situation who also had opinions about books she'd read at the library and took the pronunciation of certain words quite seriously and had a dry wit that emerged in flashes when she was comfortable enough. She wasn't comfortable exactly, but she was getting there. She'd had a job interview, she told him one Tuesday, at an accounting firm downtown. Entry level. She'd borrowed clothes from the shelter's donation closet. The interview had gone well, she thought, but she hadn't heard back. When was this? 10 days ago. That might just be their timeline. Or it might be that I listed a shelter as my address on the application. She said it flatly, without drama, just a fact. That tends to close doors. Landon looked at her. Is that legal? Probably not, but proving it is something else. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle on the table. I could, He stopped. She was already shaking her head. I don't want a job through you, she said. I really do. But I need to get things on my own. Or it doesn't mean anything. That's stubborn. Probably. She met his eyes. It's also true. He let it go, but he held it. The library sat on Meridian Avenue, a solid old building that had survived several city renewal projects through sheer architectural bulk and the particular stubbornness of its longtime director, a woman named Dr. Priya Okafor, who showed up to every city council hearing with a folder of statistics and an expression that closed arguments. Elena had been coming here every day for 3 weeks. It was warm, it had bathrooms, it had computers, and nobody asked her to leave as long as she was quiet and not bothering anyone. She was always quiet. She never bothered anyone. On a Wednesday morning in late November, she was at the children's section, not for any particular reason except that it was near the window and the morning light came in best there, and she liked to sit in good light when she could get it. She heard the argument before she saw either of them. I don't want to be here. I know. Then why are we here? Because you're supposed to do 20 minutes of independent reading and the house is loud today. The house isn't loud. You're on a call. A pause. Yes, I'm on a call, which is why I need you to read somewhere quiet. The library is your somewhere quiet, not mine. Noah, please. She looked up. A man, Landon, she registered, a beat later than she should have, maybe because she'd been seeing him in the context of a cafe and he looked different here, taller somehow. Or more tired, wearing a suit but with the tie loose and a phone wedged between his shoulder and ear, was navigating a reluctant 8-year-old through the children's section with the particular barely contained desperation of a parent who needs 10 minutes and isn't going to get them. The boy, Noah, she now knew, had the dark eyes from the phone photo and an expression of theatrical suffering that 8-year-olds specialize in. He also spotted her before his father did. Kids have a different radar. They're not looking for context or category. He just saw a person making eye contact and did what kids sometimes do, which is walk directly toward that person without any of the social friction adults accumulate. "Do you work here?" he asked. "No," she said. "Then why are you sitting in the kids section?" "Noah." Landon had turned, seen her, and visibly recalibrated. "Elena." "Hi. I'm sorry. The light's good here," she told Noah, answering his question. "In the mornings, the light comes in from that window, and it's the best spot in the whole library." Noah turned and looked at the window with the assessing gaze of someone who takes this kind of information seriously. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, I see it. You looking for something to read?" "No." "He is," Landon said, covering the phone with his palm. "I'm not." "Do you like any particular kind of story?" Elena asked. Not pressing, just asking. Noah considered her. He had the evaluating quality of a kid who'd learned to be careful about adults who were too cheerful or too interested, the artificiality of which he could detect with precision. She wasn't being too cheerful. She was just asking. "I like stories where things go wrong," he said. "Wrong how?" "Like, where things aren't fixed at the end, where something breaks and it stays a little broken, even when it's better." He paused. "Most books for kids, everything gets fixed perfect. I don't like that." Elena looked at him for a moment. "I know exactly what you mean," she said. Something shifted in his face, not a smile, more like the particular expression of someone who has said a true thing and been understood. Landon, phone still to his ear but clearly not absorbing whatever was being said on the other end, was watching this exchange with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "Come here," she said to Noah. "I was just looking at this section. Let me show you something." She found him 3 books that day. Not because she had encyclopedic knowledge of children's literature, but because she'd spent enough time in this section over the past weeks that she knew what was there, and she could calibrate by the look on his face as he read the jacket copy. That slight lean forward meant interested. The imperceptible pullback meant not this one. He picked one, a novel about a boy and his grandfather navigating a house fire, and what they each kept and what they lost, and settled into the chair across from her with the naturalness of someone who had decided she was fine. Landon finished his call, pulled a chair over and tried to do whatever work he'd brought on his tablet, but she noticed, in her peripheral vision, that he kept watching Noah read. After 40 minutes, Noah looked up. "It's a good book," he said. "Yeah?" "The grandfather doesn't get better. I thought he was going to, but he doesn't." He looked at the page. "That feels more real." "A lot of real things don't get better," Elena said. "They just get different." He thought about this. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," she said. "It's supposed to be true." He nodded slowly, like he was filing this under things that made sense to him. Landon, across the table, had stopped pretending to look at his tablet. After that, Noah asked about her. Landon handled this with the parental version of walking a tightrope. He told Noah enough to be honest, but not enough to be complicated. Elena was someone he'd met. She was going through a hard time. She was smart and kind. "Is she your friend?" Noah asked. "I think so," Landon said. "Yes." "She gets it," Noah said, in the manner of someone delivering a verdict, "about the broken things." "Yeah," Landon said. "I think she does." He started seeing her outside of Tuesdays. Not by design exactly, but Westbridge was a city where a few neighborhoods did the heavy lifting for most people, and once you knew someone was in it, you started catching them in the margins of your ordinary days. He saw her at the library twice more. Once at the coffee shop on Meridian, where he stopped on the way into work. She was using the Wi-Fi, nursing a tea that had long since gone cold, working on something on a donated laptop she'd acquired somehow. They started texting, though he wasn't entirely sure how that happened. She'd sent him an article about something they'd been discussing, the housing shortage, which she had strong and specific opinions about, and then the thread just continued. She sent dry, carefully punctuated texts. He sent slightly longer ones. They didn't call each other. That felt like too much, for reasons neither of them would have been able to fully explain. One evening, late November, Noah called him into his room. "Dad, I want to give Elena something." He was standing by his bookshelf with the particular expression of someone who has already made a decision and is now informing others. "Okay," Landon said carefully. "The book I got at the library. I finished it." He held it up. "I want to give it to her. The shelter took back my copy, but I looked it up and found it at another library book sale, and I used my birthday money to buy it." He paused. "Can I give it to her next time you see her?" Landon looked at his son, 8 years old, spent his own birthday money on a book for a woman he'd met once in a library because she'd told him the truth about broken things. "Yeah," he said, "you can." He didn't see the storm coming, which was his fault. He'd been watching the ground and not the sky. It started with Marcus. Marcus Webb was Landon's head of communications. 35, sharp, operating on exactly the frequency where ambition and loyalty overlapped enough to be useful, but not enough to be entirely comfortable. He was also the person who managed what got said about Landon publicly and what didn't. He called on a Thursday evening. "I need to ask you something, and I need you not to be defensive about it." "Marcus, there are people who've noticed you having lunch, repeatedly, with the same woman, at Birch and Bloom." A pause. "There's a photo." Landon sat up in his chair. "Who took a photo?" "The internet, Landon. Someone thought it was interesting, a local social account. It's not major yet. But if this woman is who people think she might be..." "What do people think she might be?" Another pause. "Someone says she's been seen at the Caldwell Street shelter, that she's..." "Look, I'm not making judgments here. I'm managing optics. I'm going to stop you," Landon said. "Landon, she's someone I have lunch with. That's all I'm going to say to you about it, and it's all I want said to anyone else. You understand me?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You know how this looks." "I know how a lot of things look. Doesn't change what they are." He paused. "Send me the post. I'll look at it." "It's not a big deal yet. I just don't want it to become one." "Marcus, send it." It was nothing. A blurry photo from across the street, posted to some local account that was mostly neighborhood watch complaints and lost dog announcements. The caption was something along the lines of "interesting lunch companion for WB's most eligible businessmen." The comment section had done what comment sections do. Landon looked at the photo for a moment. He and Elena, through the cafe window, over sandwiches. She was talking. He was listening. He looked to himself more present than he'd looked in photographs in years. He closed the app. He texted Elena. "Heads up. Someone posted a blurry photo of us having lunch. Nothing bad, but wanted you to know." Her response came 20 minutes later. "Oh no. Is it a good angle at least?" He stared at the text for a moment. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, sudden and slightly startled, the kind he hadn't produced in a while. "Terrible angle. We both look suspicious." Fitting Webter. His brother called the following day. Daniel Ashcroft was 41 and lived in Phoenix and had opinions about everything and the confidence of a man who'd never had to go looking for it. "I'm just asking questions," Daniel said. "You're not. You're making statements in question form. I'm asking if this is..." "Landon, you haven't dated anyone since Sarah." "I'm not dating Elena." "But you're spending time with her, bringing her into Noah's life." "She met Noah once at a library." Marcus says a lot of things. That's what I pay him for. What I don't pay him for is reporting to my brother. "I'm worried about you." A pause. "About Noah. You've got someone..." "Look, I don't know her situation specifically." "No, you don't. But if she's taking advantage of..." "Daniel." He kept his voice level. "Elena has never once asked me for anything. Not money, not help, nothing. The first time I invited her to lunch, she tried to order only the soup because she didn't want to be a burden. Every time I've tried to help, she's pushed back. So whatever story you're telling yourself about angles and motives, it's yours, not mine." Silence. "I just don't want you to get hurt again," Daniel said. "I know." "Okay?" "Okay." He hung up. He stood at his office window for a moment, looking at the city. 3 years. 3 years of people handling him carefully, the way you handle something fragile, something that might break again. It had been well-intentioned. It had also been, He was realizing, slightly suffocating. Elena didn't handle him carefully. She argued with him about the soup. She sent him articles and expected him to have read them. She told his son the truth about broken things. He thought about this for a long time. The first week of December came in hard. Temperature dropping, snow that couldn't decide if it was rain, the particular gray that settled over Westbridge like it planned to stay. He hadn't seen Elena in person for 9 days. She'd found occasional day work. He knew this from texts. Data entry for a temp agency. It wasn't consistent. He also knew from things she didn't say directly, but that he'd learned to read, that the shelter was increasingly unreliable and that the nights were getting complicated. He didn't bring it up. She didn't want to be fixed. He was learning to respect that in real time, which was harder than it sounded. His instinct was to solve. It had always been his instinct. It was why he was good at what he did. And Elena was not a problem to be solved. But she was also in genuine trouble, and sitting with that without acting on it went against every trained reflex he had. He was in his office on a Friday at 4 in the afternoon when he got a text from Derek, the server at Birch and Bloom, who'd somehow accumulated his number in the way peripheral people sometimes do. "Hey, there's a woman who comes in sometimes with you? Dark hair, green jacket. She's been standing outside for like an hour. Didn't want to say anything, but it's really cold and she looked bad." He grabbed his coat before he'd fully processed the text. The drive was 12 blocks and took 8 minutes because of a delivery truck blocking Alderman. He parked without finding a proper spot and left the hazards on and walked. She was at the side of the building, not the front, sitting on the step of the service entrance, her back against the brick wall, the plastic bag wedged against her side. Her jacket was not built for December. Her arms were wrapped around herself. Her hair was wet from whatever the sky was doing. She looked up when she heard him. Landon. Flat, controlled, the voice of someone who is holding something very tightly. "Elena, Derek texted you." "Yeah, I'm fine." He looked at her for a moment. She was shaking, small, controlled shakes, the kind that happen when a body overrides the mind's instruction to appear fine. He sat down next to her on the step. She looked at him. "What are you doing?" "Sitting." "The step is dirty." "I noticed." She was quiet for a moment, then very quietly. "The shelter had a pipe issue last night. They moved us out. I was going to figure something out. I just needed a minute." "How long have you been sitting here?" She didn't answer. "Elena, how long?" "A while," she said. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the alley, at the dumpsters and the back of the building across the way, at the gray December sky above the narrow slice of space between them. He said, "I'd like you to come home with me." She was immediately shaking her head. "Not," he said. "Listen, we have 7 bedrooms. I'm using 2 of them. It's a house, not... I'm not asking for anything. I'm asking you to not spend tonight on a step outside a cafe in a jacket that isn't built for December. You can't just..." "I know I can't fix things," he said. "I'm not trying to fix things. I'm asking if you want to not be cold tonight." She looked at him. The controlled expression had slipped somewhere in the last 30 seconds. Not broken, but bent. "Noah's going to be home," he said. "He's going to lose his mind. He has a book he bought with his own birthday money that he's been waiting to give you for 2 weeks. Something happened in her face, a cracking, almost. Contained, but visible. "He spent his birthday money," she said. "He did." She looked at the alley for a long moment. The shaking had not stopped. "Okay," she said. Her voice was very small, and very careful, and very tired. "Okay," he said. He stood and offered his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she took it, and stood, and picked up her plastic bag, and walked out of the alley with him into the cold December afternoon. Neither of them spoke on the way to the car. There was nothing that needed to be said just yet. There was a long road ahead of both of them, full of things they couldn't see from here. But right now there was a car with heat, and a boy at home who had spent his birthday money on a book for a woman he'd met once because she'd told him the truth, and 3 people who were each, in their own way, in the middle of figuring out what came next. Sometimes that's where the most important things begin, not in the grand gesture or the perfect moment, or the clean resolution, in the small mercy of a warm car after a cold step, in the hand that's offered and the one that reaches back. The house was too big. Elena had known it would be because people with Landon's kind of money always had houses that were trying to say something about achievement, about permanence, about the distance traveled from wherever they'd started. But knowing a thing and standing inside it were different experiences, and she stood in the entryway of 14 Crestwood Drive with her plastic bag against her leg and her wet hair starting to dry in the warm air, and felt, very specifically, like something that had been tracked in from outside. The floor was dark hardwood. The ceilings were high. There was a staircase that curved, not dramatically, not like something from a movie, but with the quiet confidence of a staircase that had nothing to prove. The walls had art on them that she didn't look at directly, because looking at art in someone's house when you were standing there with a plastic bag felt like too much. "I'll show you the guest room," Landon said, setting his keys on a table near the door with the practiced motion of a man who'd done this 10,000 times. "It has its own bathroom. The towels are... There should be towels. Mrs. Hendricks keeps them stocked." "Who's Mrs. Hendricks?" "She helps with the house. She's not here in the evenings." He paused. "You can have whatever's in the kitchen. Don't ask me before you take something. Just take it." "Okay." "I mean it. I'll know if you're being polite about it, and I'll find it irritating." She almost smiled. "Noted." He started toward the stairs and then stopped. He looked at the ceiling briefly, like he was checking something. "Noah doesn't know you're coming. I should... Let me go up first. Give me a minute." She nodded. He went upstairs, and she stood in the entryway alone, listening to the house adjust around her. The particular sound of central heat, the faint tick of something settling in the walls, the muffled footsteps above her head. She looked down at her plastic bag. Inside it, a change of clothes. Her phone charger. A small notebook she'd had since before everything fell apart, in which she'd written nothing for 4 months because there was nothing she wanted to record. A paperback that someone at the shelter had left behind. 2 granola bars she'd been saving. She thought about the apartment she'd had 2 years ago, the 1-bedroom in the south part of the city with the radiator that made noise all winter, and the window that didn't quite seal at the bottom, and the kitchen that was technically functional if you didn't need all 4 burners at once. She'd thought of it as inadequate when she'd had it. She'd thought about the radiator noise and the draft under the window and the broken burner and cataloged them as evidence that her life hadn't landed where she'd intended. She would give a great deal for that apartment right now. Footsteps on the stairs, lighter and faster than Landon's. Noah appeared at the top and then came down with the controlled urgency of a kid who is trying to not run but has not committed to the bit. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom. "Hi," he said. "Hi, Noah." "Dad said you're staying." He said it as information, not question or complaint. "For tonight. Maybe a couple of nights, depending on..." She stopped, simplified. "Yes." He came down the last 3 steps. He was wearing socks that had small dogs on them. She noticed this because she was nervous and the socks were easier to look at than his face. "I have your book," he said. She looked up. "I heard. I've been carrying it around for 2 weeks." He seemed to feel this was relevant. "In my backpack, in case I saw you." Something lodged in her throat. She pushed it down. Thank you, Noah. That was really thoughtful. I'll go get it." He was already turning back toward the stairs. "Wait there." Landon appeared at the top of the stairs, looked down at her. She looked up at him. He made a small, helpless gesture that said something like, "He operates on his own timeline, and I've stopped trying to direct it." She understood. Noah came back down with the book held in 2 hands, a presentation, deliberate. He'd wrapped it in brown paper, not gift wrap, the practical brown kind, taped with the amateur precision of a child working alone. There was a small piece of masking tape on the front on which he'd written, in the large, careful letters of a kid who'd been told his handwriting needed work, for Elena. From Noah. "Because you get it." She took it. She looked at the wrapping, the tape, the handwriting. "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected, which was an achievement. "You don't have to keep the wrapper," Noah said. "I know it's not that good." "I'm keeping the wrapper." He seemed satisfied by this. Okay, are you hungry? Dad said he was going to make pasta, but Dad's pasta is sometimes weird. I can tell him to order pizza instead if you want. She looked at the boy, 8 years old, socks with dogs on them, a book wrapped in brown paper, trying in his particular way to make her comfortable in a house where she was manifestly out of place. What kind of pasta? She asked. The kind with the stuff in it. That's a very specific description. I don't know what it's called. It has the little tube things. Penny? Maybe. It's fine. It's just sometimes he puts in too much of the red pepper and then I have to drink a lot of water. She laughed. Actually laughed. Sudden and unguarded, the way laughing works when it catches you before you can decide about it. Noah looked pleased. Let's see how the pasta goes, she said, and if it's too spicy, we reassess. Okay, he said. Come on, the kitchen's this way. He led her down the hall like he owned the place, which of course he did, and she followed with her plastic bag and her brown paper book and the strange floating sensation of standing in a life that was not hers and being, despite all reasonable expectation, slightly warmer than she'd been an hour ago. The kitchen was large and well-equipped and showed the specific signs of being mostly used by someone who cooked occasionally, but not with great confidence. A few stray spice jars with their caps slightly misaligned, a cutting board that lived on the counter rather than being put away, a drawer that was open an inch because it had been opened and not properly closed, probably several hours ago. Landon was at the stove. He'd changed out of the suit jacket and was in a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up, doing something with onions that suggested he was further into the process than she'd expected. I make pasta, he said, not turning around. I'll be honest with you, I don't know exactly what it's called. I've been making the same thing for 3 years and I've never looked up whether it has a name. Noah described it as the thing with the tube things and the stuff. That's accurate. He looked over his shoulder. It's actually not bad. The red pepper situation. Noah, I'm aware you think I overseasoned it last time. I'm correcting for that. You said that last time, Noah said. I'm correcting with intent this time. Elena put her plastic bag down against the kitchen wall, out of the way, and stood for a moment with her hands slightly unsure of where to go. Can I help? She asked. Landon glanced at her. Do you cook? I used to. I'm not sure what I still know how to do. It's been... She stopped. Yes, I can help. He handed her a wooden spoon without ceremony. Stir that while I deal with the garlic. Don't let it stick. She took the spoon, stood at the stove, stirred the sauce that was beginning to form in the pan, smelling like onions and tomato and something herbal she couldn't immediately identify. It was, she thought, the most normal thing she'd done in 4 months. She stirred. He dealt with the garlic. Noah sat on the kitchen counter, which Landon told him not to do, and which Noah ignored in the practiced way of a child who has identified which rules are actually enforced and which are performative. They made dinner. It wasn't smooth. Landon burned the garlic slightly and swore under his breath. And Noah said, I heard that, and Landon said, no, you didn't. And the pasta was a little past al dente because they'd been talking when it should have been pulled, and there wasn't enough Parmesan because apparently no one had checked. But they sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, and ate the pasta with the slightly burned garlic and the insufficient Parmesan, and Noah told a long and elaborately detailed story about something that had happened at school involving a substitute teacher and a hamster that had escaped its cage. And Elena listened and laughed in the right places, and Landon watched his son with the expression of a man who is registering something he doesn't quite have a name for yet. She ate 2 helpings. She did it without apology, which was progress. After dinner, Noah went upstairs to do homework with the level of enthusiasm typical to 8-year-olds faced with homework, which is to say, none at all. And Landon and Elena stood in the kitchen doing the particular intimate awkward thing of 2 people cleaning up together who haven't established if they do this as a team or in parallel. She washed. He dried. It was not discussed. It just happened. Thank you, she said, handing him a pot. For tonight. You don't have to thank me every 20 minutes. I've been thanking you twice. That's not every 20 minutes. You thanked me in the car, and just now. And I'll probably thank you again when I go to bed because that's how I was raised. She handed him another pot. You can tell me to stop, but I'm probably not going to. He dried the pot. put it on the counter. How were you raised? He asked. Not intrusively, like he actually wanted to know. She thought about it. Southern, she said. Small town. My parents they were okay people. My dad worked at a mill. My mom taught fourth grade. She paused. They're gone now. Both of them. I'm sorry. A while ago. I had a brother too, but we don't talk. She handed him the last pan. It's complicated. He nodded, didn't push. She pulled the drain and watched the water go. What about you? Parents are in Florida. They went there when my dad retired and sort of dissolved into it. He set the pan down. My brother Daniel called me last week to tell me he was concerned about my judgment. She looked at him. Because of me. Because of me, he said. My judgment is mine. She looked at the empty sink. People are going to have opinions about this, about me being here. People have opinions about everything I do. I've stopped finding it useful to factor in. That's easy to say when you have enough money that the opinions don't affect your mortgage. He was quiet for a moment. Fair point, and he knew it. You're right, he said. But I'm still not interested in their opinions. She leaned against the counter. Outside the kitchen window, Westbridge was doing its December thing, dark and cold, the streetlights making yellow halos in the wet air. What are you interested in? She asked. The question came out slightly more direct than she'd intended. She didn't walk it back. He looked at her. He had that quality she'd noticed from the beginning, the kind of stillness that came from thinking before speaking, which was rarer than it should be. I'm interested, he said slowly, in what happens after things fall apart. How people put something back together. He paused. Or don't. She thought about the notebook in her plastic bag. 4 months empty. That's a heavy thing to be interested in. Yeah. He straightened, moved to turn off the kitchen light. But it tends to be the interesting part. She went to bed that night in a room that had fresh towels and a window that sealed properly and a mattress that was so much better than what she'd been sleeping on that the contrast was almost dizzying. She lay in the dark for a long time. The house made its noises around her, the heat, the settling, the distant sound of a television somewhere that went off at 10:30, the quiet after. She opened the brown paper book. She read the first chapter. It was good. The boy in the story lost things clearly and specifically without making it pretty. She appreciated that. She read until she was too tired to read, and then she put the book on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling and thought about the fact that tomorrow she would have to figure out what came next, which she had been thinking about every day for 4 months and had not yet solved, but which tonight felt strangely like a problem that had a little more air around it. Not solved. Not better. Just slightly less airless. She slept. In the morning, she woke to the sound of cabinet doors in the kitchen below, and what she gradually identified as someone making coffee with a machine that was slightly too powerful for a quiet house. She lay still for a moment, reorienting, the ceiling, the towels, the sealed window. Right. She got up. She had one change of clothes in the bag, which she put on. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her hair, her face, the dark circles that had taken up residence under her eyes sometime in September and hadn't left. She looked like herself but worn, like a book that had been through too many hands. She went downstairs. Landon was at the kitchen counter with coffee and a phone, reading something with an expression of moderate dissatisfaction. He was already in a suit, which at 7 in the morning struck her as an act of aggression against the day. Coffee's on the counter, he said without looking up. She poured herself a mug. It was very good coffee, the kind that reminded her what coffee was supposed to taste like. You have a meeting? I have a series of them starting at 8. They'll go until at least 3. He put the phone face down. Noah's school pickup is at 3:15. I usually have my driver get him, but... He paused. I don't know what your day looks like. I have a follow-up call with the temp agency at 10, she said. And I was going to go to the library in the afternoon, but I can be flexible. He looked at her. You don't have to pick up Noah. I know I don't have to. I'm not trying to create arrangements. I know you're not. She held her mug. But he's going to be by himself at 3:15 if neither of us is there, and you just told me that, so I'm offering. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression did a small, almost imperceptible thing, like a calculation that resolved into something other than what it started as. He gets out at Meridian Elementary, he said. Corner of Meridian and Oak. The teachers do carpool pickup. You just tell them your name and they'll confirm Noah. I'll put you on the authorized list this morning. Okay. He'll talk the entire way home about whatever happened that day, in detail, chronologically. I know. He did that at the library, too. Something that might have been a smile moved across Landon's face and then receded before it fully arrived. Yeah, that's him. She picked Noah up at 3:15. He came out the double doors with his backpack and a drawing that he carried flat in both hands, the kind of horizontal carrying that communicated importance. He spotted her, and something happened in his face. Not surprise, more like confirmation of a thing he'd half expected. I thought maybe you'd be here, he said. Here I am. He fell into step beside her, the drawing still held flat. Did Dad tell you to come? I offered. He usually sends a driver, Mr. Patterson. He smells like those car things. He wrinkled his nose. Air fresheners. Pine? I think it's supposed to be pine. It just smells like trying to smell like pine. He stepped over a crack in the sidewalk. I don't mind. Mr. Patterson lets me listen to whatever I want in the car, and he doesn't ask questions about my day. She glanced at him. Do you not like answering questions about your day? I don't mind answering them. A pause. I mind when people ask them like they're filling out a form. How was school? What did you learn? Did you eat your lunch? He said this in a flattened, rote voice. They don't actually want to know. They want to say they asked. She thought about this. What do you want people to actually ask? He considered. They turned the corner onto the block where a coffee shop had its chalkboard sign out front, the one that always had something philosophical written on it in imperfect letters. I want them to ask what I thought about, he said finally. Not what I did, what I thought about. Okay, she said. What did you think about today? He looked up at her quickly, checking if she was sincere. She held his gaze without performing it. I thought about what you said, he said, at the library. About things not getting better, they just get different. He walked another block. I was thinking about whether that's true about missing people too. Like, if you miss someone, does it get different or does it just get smaller? She walked beside him and didn't rush the silence. I think it gets more familiar, she said. Like, at first it's this enormous thing and you don't know how to be in the same room as it. And then slowly you learn to exist alongside it. It doesn't shrink exactly. You just get bigger. He thought about this with visible effort. Do you miss someone? Yes. Who? My mom, she said. And some version of my life I thought I was going to have. She paused. That sounds... No, I get that, he said quickly. Missing a version of something. I miss the version of our house where my mom was in it. The house is the same, but it's a different version. She looked at him, 8 years old. Yeah, she said quietly. Exactly like that. He looked at the drawing he was still carrying flat. I made this in art class today. It's supposed to be abstract, but it looks like something. The teacher said that's fine, that even when you're trying to be abstract, you end up making something real. She looked at the drawing as they walked. It was mostly blues and grays with a streak of yellow across the middle that might have been accidental or might have been very deliberate. What does it look like to you? She asked. Like a window, he said, from inside a dark room. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. They walked the rest of the way in a companionable quiet, the kind that doesn't need filling, and Elena held on to that, this small, ordinary thing. A sidewalk in December, a kid with a drawing, the pale winter light coming through the trees, because she'd learned in the past 4 months that the small, ordinary things were the ones worth holding. Landon came home at 5:40. He walked in and found them at the kitchen table, Elena helping Noah with math homework that Noah was finding actively offensive. It doesn't make sense, Noah was saying, to divide by a fraction. If I have something and I divide it, I should have less of it, not more. I know it feels that way, Elena said, but dividing by a fraction is actually asking a different question. You're not asking how many pieces, you're asking how many times the fraction fits into the whole. That's just words. Let me show you with the pasta. We don't have pasta out. We have She looked around and found a half-used box of crackers on the counter, which she pulled over. "We have crackers. Pretend these are the whole." Landon stood in the kitchen doorway watching this. He'd taken off his jacket in the hallway. He had the particular look of someone arriving home to a thing they didn't expect, and the thing being better than what they expected, and not quite knowing what to do with that. Noah looked up and saw him. "Dad, Elena's teaching me fractions with crackers." "I see that. It almost makes sense." "High praise," Landon said. He set his bag down. "How was the rest of your day?" he asked Elena. "Temp agency has something for next week. Data entry, 3 days, downtown." She moved a cracker to illustrate something for Noah. "It's not much, but it's something." "That's good. It's a start." She didn't look up from the crackers. "I also made some calls about getting my bookkeeping certification renewed. There's a course that starts in January online that I can do from the library." He sat down at the table across from her. Noah was doing the math problem again with fresh concentration, crackers arranged in front of him. "The library's 30 minutes from here by bus," Landon said. "I know, I've done it." "You could work here. We have Wi-Fi. The kitchen table is—" "Landon." He stopped. She looked at him. "I need to not start depending on things that aren't mine." He held her gaze. He understood, he thought, or he was trying to. "Okay," he said. "But thank you," she added, "for offering." "Every 20 minutes," he said. She looked at him blankly. "You said you thank me every 20 minutes," he said. "You're on schedule." She looked down at the crackers to hide the expression on her face, but not quite fast enough. Noah, who missed very little, looked between them. "What's funny?" he asked. "Nothing," they both said, and that was somehow funnier, and Elena pressed her lips together and focused very hard on the fraction problem. She stayed 3 nights, which became 4, which became the end of the week. She didn't decide to stay. She also didn't decide to leave. She existed in the house in the way of someone trying to take up as little space as possible, while also slowly, involuntarily, fitting into its rhythms. The coffee in the morning, the after-school routine that had spontaneously established itself, the dinner that was sometimes Landon attempting to cook, and sometimes, twice, Elena cooking because she was there and had the time, and it was the most useful thing she could do. She made soup one evening, a real soup, from scratch, the kind her mother had taught her that needed 2 hours and a certain amount of attention. The house smelled like it for the rest of the night. Noah ate 3 bowls. "This is better than Dad's pasta," he said with the brutal honesty of children. "Don't put that on record," Elena said. "He's right," Landon said, and seemed to mean it without any ego about it, which she hadn't expected. What she also hadn't expected was the difficulty of it, not the logistics. The logistics were straightforward. The house had room, nobody was in anyone's way, but the emotional geometry of it. 3 people with different griefs and different histories and different ways of managing those things, occupying the same space and bumping into each other's edges. Landon had moods. She was learning that. Days when he came home sealed off, polite, present, but with a wall up that he wasn't aware of, or maybe was aware of, and had made peace with. She didn't push on those days, but she noticed them. She had her own too. Mornings when she woke up and the weight of everything. The job she'd lost, the apartment she'd lost, the savings that had gone first to the medical bills when she'd been sick 2 winters ago, and then to the rent she'd tried to hold on to as long as she could, and then to nothing because there was nothing left, sat on her chest like something physical. She would make coffee and stand at the kitchen window and give herself exactly 10 minutes with it before she put it down and went about the day. 10 minutes was the deal she'd made with herself. No more. Noah had nightmares. She heard him, twice, calling out in the night from across the hall. Not screaming, just that particular distressed sound of a child who's woken up in the middle of something bad. Both times Landon was there within seconds, which told her he slept light or didn't sleep much, or both. She would hear the murmur of his voice through the wall, low and steady, and Noah's voice gradually slowing and then quiet. She would lie in the dark and think about the particular loneliness of loving a child and not being able to take the hard things away from him. She thought about that more than she'd expected to. By the end of that week, Landon's brother Daniel called again. She knew because Landon took the call in his office on the second floor with the door closed, and she was passing in the hallway on her way to get water, and she heard enough to understand without trying to. Not asking you to explain her situation to me, I'm asking you to think about Noah. Noah is fine. Noah is better than fine. You don't know anything about her, Landon. You have one of the wealthiest estates in the city, and you've brought a stranger. She's not a stranger. You met her 2 months ago. A door closing. She went to get her water. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after, looking at the counter. She thought about what Daniel Ashcroft wasn't wrong about, technically. He wasn't wrong that Landon didn't know much about her. He wasn't wrong that she was, by any reasonable outside assessment, an enormous variable in a life that was already managing complexity. What he didn't know, what most people outside a situation never know, was the texture of it from the inside. The way Noah had handed her the brown paper book in 2 hands like an offering. The way Landon had sat down beside her on a dirty step in December and not said anything for a full minute, just sat there, which was the most useful thing anyone had done for her in longer than she could easily recall. She put her water glass down. She went to her room. She opened the notebook that had been empty for 4 months, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and after a moment she wrote something in it. Not much. 1 line, stopped going in circles today. I don't know what I'm going toward, but I think I'm going toward something. She closed the notebook. She put it on the nightstand next to the brown paper book. Outside, the December night was the same as all the December nights. Dark, cold, the city doing its distant rumble below. But inside the room, there were towels on the rack and coffee in the morning, and a window that sealed against the cold. And down the hall, a boy who thought about things deeply, and a man who was slowly remembering how to be in a house instead of just inside it. And she was, by some sequence of events she still couldn't fully account for, part of the particular broken, imperfect, still figuring it out fabric of this place. Not fixed, not even close to fixed, but no longer falling. And for now, on this December night, that was enough. The notebook line she'd written in December turned into 2 lines by January, and then a paragraph, and then something she did most evenings before sleep. Not journaling in the way people mean when they say journaling, nothing therapeutic or structured, just the act of writing down what had happened and what she'd thought about it, the way you'd tell someone about your day if you had someone to tell. She hadn't had someone to tell for a long time. The temp work started the 2nd week of January. 3 days of data entry at a mid-sized logistics company on the 14th floor of a building downtown that smelled like recycled air and carpet cleaner, and the specific ambition of people who were trying very hard in medium-sized offices. She wore the clothes she'd assembled since December. Landon had said, once, carefully, that there was a card on the kitchen counter that she could use for anything she needed, and she had stared at him for a long moment and then said she'd repay him when she could. And he'd said that wasn't what he meant, and she'd said she knew what he meant, and she appreciated it, but she needed to do it this way. He'd nodded. The card stayed on the counter for 4 days and then disappeared, which she took to mean he'd understood. She bought 2 blouses and a pair of dark pants from a discount store on Meridian. They were not remarkable clothes. They were adequate, which was what she needed them to be. On the first morning of the temp job, she stood outside the building and looked at the revolving door and the lobby beyond it, and the security desk with the attendant behind it checking badges, and the people moving through in that specific office building current, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a while, something with actual edges to it. Not optimism, exactly, but its quieter cousin. The particular state of being about to do a thing that is within your capacity to do. She went through the revolving door. She was good at the work. This wasn't a surprise to her. She'd always been methodical, detail-oriented, the kind of person who caught errors that other people had stopped seeing because they'd looked at the same document too many times. By day 2, the woman supervising the temp intake, whose name was Brenda and who had the energy of someone who had been managing small crises for so long that she found genuine calm in it, told her she was the fastest and most accurate data entry they'd had in months. "You do bookkeeping before?" Brenda asked. "For about 5 years," Elena said. "Before a gap." Brenda looked at her over the top of reading glasses that she wore on a beaded chain around her neck. "We might have something more permanent. It's not glamorous." I'm not looking for glamorous. End of February, probably. If you want to come back for the 2-week extension, and if you're interested, I'll put your name in. Elena said yes. She said it without equivocating, which was also progress. She told Landon that evening. They were in the kitchen. This had become the default location for conversations, as if the kitchen were the room in the house that had tacitly agreed to be neutral territory, the place where things could be said without the weight of the living room's formal furniture or the privacy of the upstairs. He was heating up leftovers. She was at the counter with her laptop, the online bookkeeping course open in one tab, and a practice exam in another. "That's good," he said. When she told him about the possible permanent position, "That's really good, Elena. It's entry level. The salary is—" She named the number, and even saying it out loud felt like something she had to brace for, the distance between what she'd once earned and what this would be. "It's a start," he said, and didn't elaborate, which she appreciated. He had a gift for knowing when to not add to a thing. "I'm also registered for the certification course." She looked at her screen. "Starts February 3rd. Online, 3 evenings a week. I can do it from—" She paused. "I've been thinking about the library, but Brenda said I could use the office after hours if I needed Wi-Fi access." "You can do it here," he said. She didn't answer immediately. "I'm not creating a dependency," he said, preempting her. "You're here. We have Wi-Fi. It's practical." She looked at him. He was looking at the microwave, not at her. He'd gotten better at delivering these offers sideways without the direct eye contact that made her feel scrutinized. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." "Every 20 minutes," he said. The certification course was harder than she'd expected, which was good, because she'd always learned best when something asked something real of her. 3 evenings a week, she sat at the kitchen table and worked through the modules while the house settled into its nighttime sounds around her. Noah would drift down sometimes in his pajamas under the guise of getting water, and he would end up sitting across from her asking what she was studying, and she would explain it in whatever terms made sense for an 8-year-old, and he would listen with serious attention and then say something like, "So money is really just a story everyone agrees to tell," and she would look at him and think about how he was going to be an interesting adult. Landon would sometimes work at the other end of the table. Not every evening. Some evenings he disappeared into his office upstairs, and she didn't ask. But sometimes he brought his laptop down and they worked in parallel, and it was the most companionable silence she'd experienced in years. The kind where you're aware of another person without it demanding anything, where the quiet between you is full rather than empty. She noticed things. She was a noticer by nature, had always been. It was part of what made her good with numbers, the ability to register small discrepancies, the detail that didn't belong. She noticed that Landon kept a photo of Sarah on his desk upstairs, but not anywhere in the common rooms of the house, which told her something about the distinction he'd drawn between his private grief and the life they all shared. She noticed that he checked on Noah twice every night, once around 9, once around 11, without varying, without fail, even when he'd been working late and was clearly exhausted. She noticed that he ate standing up when he was stressed, leaning against the kitchen counter instead of sitting, and that this happened most often on Wednesdays, which she eventually traced to a standing board call that he seemed to find draining in a specific way. She didn't say any of this, but she knew it. What she didn't know, didn't let herself look at too directly, was the other thing. The thing that had been developing in the background of all the practical realities, the temp job, and the certification course, and the library, and the kitchen table. The way you don't look directly at a light source because looking directly makes it harder to see. It was just there. Existing. She managed it the way she managed most difficult things, which was by keeping busy and keeping useful and not following the thought to wherever it was going. In February, a woman named Carla Voss arrived at the house. Elena had not been given advance notice of this, which was probably an oversight on Landon's part, and not a statement, but it didn't feel that way in the moment. She opened the door. She'd started doing this, answering the door because she was usually the one home in the late afternoon, and found a woman in her mid-40s in a good coat with the particular expression of someone taking a social inventory. "You must be Elena," Carla said, in the tone of someone who had been told about Elena and had already formed a position. "I am, and you're Carla Voss. I'm an old friend of Landon's. We were at the same firm about a decade ago." A pause that was just long enough to be pointed. I didn't realize he had company. He's picking up Noah. Elena stepped back to let her in because she had been raised with manners, and manners were things that held even when everything else had dissolved. Do you want to come in? I can text him. Carla came in. She looked at the house the way people look at spaces they know well when they find something new in them. She looked at Elena's laptop on the kitchen table, the course materials, the coffee mug. Are you? Carla started. I'm staying here for the time being, Elena said, before Carla could ask it in a way that would require more. I see. She sat down on the living room couch without being invited to, which was either a mark of familiarity with the house or something else. How long have you known Landon? Elena measured the question. A few months. How did you meet? At a cafe? Carla nodded slowly as if Elena had confirmed something. I've known him since before Sarah died, she said. He had a hard time of it. A lot of people were worried about him. That makes sense, Elena said. It sounds like he loved her. He did. Carla looked at her, not hostile exactly, but not warm either, something clinical. He's also someone who can be, generous to a fault, when he decides someone needs something. Elena held the woman's gaze steadily. I haven't asked him for anything, she said, in case that's the question you're working toward. I wasn't. You were, Elena said, calmly. Not aggressively, but without backing down. It's okay. I'd probably have the same question from the outside, but since we're being direct, I am working. I'm paying my own way as much as I can, and I'm going to continue to do that. I don't have a design on Landon's money or his house or anything else. Carla looked at her for a long moment. What do you have a design on? She asked. And it wasn't entirely hostile. There was something genuine in it, some form of real question under the territorial one. Elena thought about it honestly. Getting back to a version of my life that I recognize, she said. That's all. The sound of the front door, and then Noah's voice at full volume about something that had happened at school, and then Landon's lower voice asking him to give it a second, and then they were both in the living room doorway, and Landon saw Carla and said her name with a particular weight that told Elena there was history here that was not entirely comfortable. I didn't know you were coming by, he said. I was in the neighborhood. Carla stood, smoothed her coat. I should have called. You should have. He said it evenly. Not a fight, but not pretending it was fine either. Noah had already moved to the kitchen with the purposeful motion of a child seeking a snack and not interested in adult social weather. Elena moved to follow him, both because he probably needed supervision with the snack situation and because she understood that Landon and Carla needed a minute without her in the frame. She made Noah a snack. She listened to him tell her about the substitute teacher situation, which had escalated into a second incident involving the same hamster and a different substitute, and the story was somehow even more elaborate than the first version. And she asked questions and laughed and was fully present with him because he needed her to be, and because being present with an 8-year-old was, she had found, one of the most reliable remedies available for the kind of low background anxiety that she'd been running on for months. Carla left 20 minutes later. Landon came into the kitchen. He stood at the counter. He poured himself water, which he didn't drink. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For not telling you she might stop by. She does that sometimes, shows up without... He stopped. She was Sarah's friend first. She's protective. It comes out sideways sometimes. She's not wrong to be protective, Elena said. She's looking out for you. He looked at her. She made you uncomfortable. A little? She shrugged. I've been uncomfortable before. I managed. She looked at Noah, who was reading at the table, and lowered her voice slightly. What did she say to you when I left? Landon was quiet for a moment. She said she didn't want to see me get hurt again. What did you say? I said I'd let you know if that became relevant. Elena looked at him. And? And she said I was being naive. He paused. And I said I was being deliberate, which was different. She didn't say anything. There was a lot she could have said, and she chose none of it, because some things needed time before they could be words. Deliberate how? She asked finally. He met her eyes, then looked away. I know what I'm doing, he said. Or I know that I know what I'm doing, even if I don't have a full picture of where it's going. He paused. I'm not naive about you being here, Elena. I don't have stars in my eyes about it. You're someone who's in a difficult situation. You're also... He stopped again. Also what? He didn't finish the sentence. He picked up his water and drank it this time, and changed the subject to whether Noah had eaten enough, which was both a retreat and also a real question, and she let it go because some things needed more time than an evening in a kitchen. March arrived, and with it the first real stretch of non-gray weather. Still cold, but with actual sunlight, the kind that made the city look like a different city, or maybe just a more honest version of the same one. Elena finished the first module of the certification course with a score that made Brenda, when she heard about it during the extended temp placement, say, I knew it, in a way that was unexpectedly moving. The permanent position came through at the end of March. Not Brenda's company, a smaller firm, a referral through a contact she'd made during the temp work, a 3-person accounting office on a quieter street that did bookkeeping and tax prep for small businesses. The salary was modest, the hours were reasonable. The office had windows that let in actual light, and a small kitchen where someone always kept decent coffee, and the woman who ran it, a 60-year-old named Patricia Sheen, had interviewed Elena for 45 minutes and then offered her the job by saying simply, You're good at this, and I think you already know it. Elena had held it together until she was back on the sidewalk outside. Then she sat on a bench in the March cold and looked at her phone for a moment and thought about calling Landon. She thought about the specific order of people you call when something good happens, and how that order tells you things about your life that you hadn't fully articulated. She called. He answered on the second ring, which meant he wasn't in a meeting. I got the job, she said. A pause. Not long. Elena. Patricia Sheen, the small firm, they offered it. She heard something in his voice she didn't have a name for yet. That's really good. That's great. It's entry level, she said, because she'd developed the habit of preempting her own good news with its caveats. But it's real. Stop doing that, he said. Doing what? Telling me the smaller version right after the good one. She looked at the street. A woman walked by with a stroller. 2 men in construction vests were doing something to a stretch of sidewalk that had buckled. An ordinary March afternoon in an ordinary city, and she had a job. Okay, she said. I got a job. It's real and it's mine. Yeah, he said. It is. She started in April. She was good at the work from day one, which was not arrogance, but just the result of spending months reviewing fundamentals while her circumstances stripped away everything that wasn't actually essential about her. What was left, it turned out, was someone who was meticulous and reliable and not afraid of complexity. Patricia told her this at the end of the first week, in the blunt way of someone who thought praise was most useful when it was specific. You caught 3 errors in the Delaney account today that we would have found eventually, but finding them now saves someone a headache in August. That's the kind of thing I pay people to do. I'll try to keep doing it, Elena said. Don't try. Just do it. You already know how. The weeks that followed had a different texture. Not ease exactly, but function. She was building something that was structurally hers, with her own name on it. She paid Landon back for the clothing she'd bought with his card, a check that she left on the kitchen counter without announcement, and he found it and came to find her in the kitchen and said he wasn't going to cash it. And she said he was going to cash it. And they went back and forth on it for 5 minutes until she said, Landon, I need you to cash that check, not for the money, for me. And he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, okay, and he cashed it. She was not a burden. She needed to keep knowing that about herself. And then April turned into May, and something shifted. It wasn't one thing. It was an accumulation. The kind of change that happens slowly and then all at once, the way weather systems work, the way grief works, the way most of the important things in life work. One evening, she was reading on the couch in the living room. She'd migrated there from her room over weeks, the way people expand into spaces that feel safe. And Landon came down from his office and sat on the other end of the couch and picked up his book, and they read in the same room for 2 hours without speaking, and it was the most comfortable she had felt in longer than she could clearly remember. Another evening, Noah had a nightmare that was worse than usual. She could tell by the sound of it, something more distressed than the ones she'd heard through the wall before. And she was already in the hallway when Landon came out of his room, and they both stood outside Noah's door for a moment and looked at each other in the half-dark. And without discussion, she went in with him, and she sat on the edge of the bed and Landon sat in the chair. And they talked Noah down together, her voice and his voice alternating in the easy way of people who have learned each other's rhythms. And Noah fell back asleep holding her hand, and she sat there until she was sure he was under. And then she let go gently, and they went back into the hallway, and Landon leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling and didn't say anything for a long moment. "Thank you," he said finally. "Every 20 minutes, she said. He laughed, low and quiet, so as not to wake Noah, but real. They stood in the hallway. She became aware that they were standing close, in the way that happens at 2 in the morning in a dark hallway when you've both just done something difficult together. She was aware of it as a fact before she was aware of it as a problem. She took a step back. Not obvious, just a step. "I should sleep," she said. "Yeah," he said. She went to her room. She lay in the dark. She thought about the step back, and whether it had been the right thing, and whether right was even the applicable category. The answer was complicated, and she fell asleep before she'd untangled it. What she didn't know was that he stood in the hallway for another full minute after she closed her door. The third shift came from an unexpected direction, as the important ones often do. It was a Saturday in May, late afternoon, and they were all three at the kitchen table. Noah with a school project that involved cutting and gluing and the specific chaos that entails. Elena with her certification course final exam prep. Landon with a stack of documents that he'd been meaning to review for 2 weeks and kept not reviewing. The radio was on in the background, something that wasn't quite jazz and wasn't quite anything else. And sunlight was coming through the kitchen window at the specific angle it came through in late May afternoons. Noah, without looking up from his project, said, "Are you two going to get married?" The room went very quiet. Elena looked at her laptop screen with the focus of someone who has decided not to react yet. Landon said, with the controlled evenness of a man buying time, "Where did that come from?" "James at school says when a lady lives at your house, it means you're getting married," Noah said, applying glue with the confidence of someone who was not tracking the temperature of the room at all. "James's information is incomplete," Landon said. "He said his mom's boyfriend moved in and 6 months later they were engaged." Noah pressed a piece of construction paper down firmly. "Elena's been here 5 months. Elena looked up from her laptop. She met Landon's eyes, briefly, across the table. She looked back at her laptop. "Elena lives here because she needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet," Landon said. "That's different from what happened with James's mom." Noah considered this. Different how? "James at school is 8, Elena said, because it seemed like it needed to be said. "I'm 8, Noah pointed out. "That was my point." He squinted at her. He was not entirely satisfied with this answer, but was also deeply involved in his gluing situation and didn't have the attention to sustain both threads. He went back to the project. Elena looked at her screen. She was very aware that Landon was not looking at her, which was different from his usual not looking at her, which was comfortable. This was deliberate. She focused on the exam prep material, accounts receivable, reconciliation, the things she knew how to do. Later, after Noah was in bed and the kitchen had been cleaned up and the Saturday evening had settled into its specific quiet, she was in the hallway putting on her jacket. She'd taken to going for short walks in the evenings, the neighborhood being safe enough that she'd learned its rhythms, which was itself a sign of how much had changed since December, when Landon came out of his office. He looked at her jacket. "Going for a walk?" "Yeah." "Can I come?" She looked at him. He had the expression of someone asking a real question with plausible deniability, which she recognized because she'd used the same expression herself in various forms over the past months. "Sure," she said. They walked. The neighborhood at 9 on a Saturday in May was a specific kind of alive, porch lights on, distant sound of someone's backyard gathering, the smell of cut grass and car exhaust, and the particular something that cities smell like when the temperature is exactly right. They walked without a fixed direction, which was something Elena had started doing when she'd been walking alone, and had kept doing when it made sense to. the navigation by feel. They didn't talk immediately. This was fine. They'd gotten good at the not talking. Noah's project was terrible, Landon said finally. It was impressionistic. The volcano was supposed to have a peak. It had more of a plateau. I think he was going for a different kind of volcano. He was going for speed. He started it at 3 in the afternoon and it was due Monday. He finished it, she said. That counts. Landon was quiet for half a block. He likes you, he said. I mean, you know that. But you're important to him. In a way that I didn't expect to happen this fast, and now that it has, I don't... He stopped walking. She stopped too, a step later, turned to look at him. They were on a corner under a streetlight in the May evening, and he was looking at the sidewalk with the expression of someone working through a calculation that has too many variables. I don't know how to talk about this, he said. You're doing okay. I'm not actually. I'm talking around the edges of it, and I know I'm doing that. He looked up. Noah asked his question today, and I gave him an answer that was technically accurate, and I've been bothered by it all evening. She waited. Because the technically accurate answer, he said, is not the complete one. The streetlight hummed above them. Down the block, someone's dog was barking at something specific and then stopping, satisfied. Landon, she said carefully. I know, he said. I know where you are. I know what you're building, and I know it needs to be yours, and I'm not trying to complicate that. He exhaled. I wanted to say the true thing out loud once, even if nothing comes of it, because I've been not saying it for 3 months and I'm tired. She looked at him. The streetlight made the shadows on his face specific. Say it then, she said. I don't want you to leave, he said, not because of Noah, not because of the routine or the house or any of the practical things, because of you, because of who you are in this house and who you are with him and who you... He stopped. I don't know when it happened, but it happened. The May air was warm and the city was doing its city things around them, and she was standing on a corner at 9 on a Saturday evening with a man who had pulled his car out of a traffic lane and sat down on a dirty step beside her in December, and she was not going to pretend she didn't know what she felt. She was also not going to be reckless with it. I hear you, she said. That's not a yes, he said. It's not a no either. She held his gaze. I'm not where I need to be yet. Not financially, I've spent 5 months in your house and I have a job and a course I'm halfway through and I'm putting myself back together, and that's real and I'm grateful for it. But I can't. I don't want what's between us to be built on me needing something and you providing it. That's not a foundation. It's not how I see it. I know it's not, but it's how I'd see myself in it, and I can't afford to see myself that way. She paused. Not yet. He was quiet. What does yet mean? He asked. It means I'm asking for time, not distance, time. She looked at him steadily. Can you do that? He thought about it, really thought about it, which was one of the things she didn't finish the thought. Yes, he said. They turned around and walked back toward the house. They walked close enough that their arms brushed twice, which neither of them commented on. At the door, she stopped. For what it's worth, she said, her hand on the doorknob. I'm not indifferent. He looked at her. That's not a small thing, she said, from where I've been. She went inside. He stood on the step for a moment in the May evening, and the warmth in the air felt like something that had been decided, though he couldn't have said exactly what. Inside, the house was quiet. Noah asleep upstairs, the kitchen still and clean, the light they'd left on over the stove making the room amber at the edges. Elena went to her room. She opened the notebook. She wrote more than one line this time. He said the true thing. I didn't run from it. I don't think I would have believed 5 months ago that I'd be standing on a corner in May with all these feelings I don't have simple words for. But here I am, still building something, still not fixed, still somehow going somewhere. She closed the notebook. She put it on the nightstand next to the brown paper book. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle, and thought about the word yet and what it contained, and how much could fit inside a single word if you let it hold the weight of everything you were still becoming. The word yet turned out to be load-bearing. It held things Elena hadn't fully anticipated when she'd set it on that May corner show. Not just the obvious things, the practical timeline of her rebuilding, but the subtler architecture of two people deciding, slowly and without announcement, that they were no longer just existing in proximity, but moving towards something. The word created space. Space was what she'd asked for, and Landon, to his credit, gave it to her in the specific way that mattered. Not by backing away, not by making it formal or strange, but by continuing to be exactly what he'd been, just with that one true thing now spoken and left to settle between them like sediment, unhurried, finding its level. June came. She passed the first section of her bookkeeping certification with a score that made Patricia Sheen set down her coffee cup and say, "That's not entry-level thinking," in a tone that suggested she was already recalculating what Elena's role at the firm was going to look like in 6 months. Elena said thank you and went back to her desk and quietly revised her internal estimate of the timeline on which she'd be able to move out of Landon's house. Not because she wanted to leave, she'd stopped pretending to herself that she wanted to leave, but because she needed the milestone, needed to be the kind of person who could leave, even if she chose not to. There was a difference. She was learning to hold both things. The summer settled into its own rhythms. Noah was out of school by mid-June, and this changed the texture of the days in ways none of them had fully planned for. He was not a child who did well with unstructured time. He needed projects, problems, things to think about, or he turned inward in ways that weren't good for him. A day camp program solved some of this. The library solved more of it. Elena, who was working full days now but was home by 5:30, solved the rest in the way she'd been solving things for months, by being present, consistent, and honest with him in a way that he could feel. She took him to the library twice a week after camp. This was not a plan anyone made. It happened the first week when the camp let out early, and she picked him up and he said, with the directness that was his most consistent quality, "Can we go to the library?" And she said yes, and they went, and they sat in the children's section with the good morning light that by mid-afternoon had moved to a different angle but was still decent. And he read and she read and they talked about what they were reading, and it became a thing. On a Tuesday, in late June, he looked up from his book and said, without preamble, "Do you think about your brother?" She looked up. "Where did that come from?" "You mentioned him once, in December. You said you had a brother and you didn't talk." He looked back at his book. "I just wondered." She set down her own book. "Sometimes," she said. "What happened?" "It's complicated." He gave her the look he'd developed for when adults said something was complicated and meant they didn't want to explain it. The look was patient but clear. It said, "I'm 8, not stupid." She thought about how much to give him. She thought about the library section they were sitting in, the good light, the particular trust of a child who had decided she was someone who told him the truth. "We had different ideas about what family is supposed to do for each other," she said. "When things got hard for me, he had a choice about how to respond. He made a choice I didn't agree with. He didn't help you?" "No." Noah thought about this. "That's bad." "It was painful," she said, "which is sometimes worse than bad." He nodded slowly. He understood painful. They both knew he did. "Are you going to try to fix it?" She looked at the window. "I don't know, maybe someday. Not right now?" "Why not right now?" "Because I'm using all my—" She paused, looking for the right word for an 8-year-old. "All my fuel on other things. I only have so much of it." He considered this with the gravity he applied to most things that mattered. "Okay," he said, "but you should maybe save some." "For your brother?" "Yeah." She looked at him. "When did you get wise?" "I've always been like this," he said, with the absolute confidence of someone who had absolutely always been like this, and went back to his book. She stayed with the question longer than she let him see. Her brother Marcus, not Landon's Marcus, a different Marcus, the one she'd grown up with in the 2-bedroom house in Cartersville, with the uneven kitchen floor and the dog that kept getting out of the yard, had called her twice during the worst of it. Once when she'd lost the apartment, once 3 weeks after. The calls had been brief. He'd said things that were technically supportive and practically useless. He hadn't offered money, which she hadn't wanted. He hadn't offered his couch, which she had. He'd said things like, "You're resilient, you'll figure it out," which was the specific kind of statement that outsources hope while keeping the speaker comfortable. She'd stopped calling him after that. He'd stopped calling her. The silence between them was old now, settled, familiar in the way of hurts that have had time to scar over. She didn't think about it every day, but a 9-year-old asking the right question at the right angle could open it again cleanly, the way a new cut sometimes does along an old line. She didn't call Marcus, but she thought about it more than she had before, which she filed away as something to deal with when she had more fuel. The thing with Carla Voss had not entirely resolved itself. She came by twice more in June, announced this time, which Landon had clearly requested. And both times Elena was present, and both times there was the specific social friction of two women who understand each other's position clearly and are being civil about it while remaining fundamentally unmoved. Elena didn't dislike Carla. She understood her. She also understood that Carla's concern for Landon was real, even when it expressed itself in ways that were directed at Elena, like soft accusations. On her second June visit, Carla asked to speak with Elena privately. This was either a good sign or a bad one, and Elena couldn't tell which before it happened. So she agreed, and they sat in the living room while Landon took Noah to the kitchen with the transparent excuse of needing help with something that was obviously fabricated. Carla folded her hands in her lap. She looked like someone who had prepared what she wanted to say and was now experiencing the particular uncertainty of whether to say it as planned or improvise. "I owe you an apology," she said. Elena waited. "I came in February with a picture already in my head about who you were and what was happening." She paused. "I wasn't fair to you." "You were protective of someone you care about," Elena said. "That's not entirely unfair." It was presumptuous. Carla looked at her hands. "I've watched Landon for 3 years. The way he's been holding himself very still. Like someone who's afraid that if they move wrong, something else will break." She looked up. "He's different now. And I can see it's not circumstantial." "Carla, I'm not saying this to push you toward anything. I'm saying it because I want you to know what I see from the outside." She paused. "He smiles more. He's present in conversations in a way he wasn't. Noah is a different child than he was 8 months ago, measurably." Elena looked at the living room. At the dark hardwood and the art on the walls she'd stopped not looking at and now had opinions about. "I know what I see," Elena said. "I live here." "I know you do." Carla was quiet for a moment. "I also know that knowing what you're worth and acting like it are two different things, especially when you've been through what you've been through." She paused. "Don't undervalue yourself in this. That's all I wanted to say." Elena looked at the woman who had walked into this house in February like a prosecutor and was now sitting across from her saying something that was, she had to admit it, something she'd needed to hear from a direction she hadn't expected it from. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Carla nodded once, the way of someone who has said what they came to say and feels the relief of it. They went back to the kitchen, where Landon had made Noah help him organize the spice drawer by alphabetical order, which Noah was doing with excessive seriousness and a running commentary on which spices he felt were unnecessary. "Turmeric," Noah said. "What is turmeric even for?" "A lot of things," Elena said. "Name one." "Rice, soup, scrambled eggs, actually." He looked deeply skeptical. "You put turmeric in eggs?" "You've had them, last Tuesday." He thought about it. "Those were good," he admitted, and set the turmeric in its alphabetical position with a grudging respect. Carla watched this and said nothing, but when she left, she hugged Elena at the door. Brief, not performative, the hug of someone recalibrating. After she was gone, Landon looked at Elena with the question in his expression. "She apologized," Elena said. "Yeah." He leaned against the door frame. "She texted me last week that she'd been wrong about you. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure She's a good person," Elena said. "She just had the wrong story first." "Most people do," he said. July brought heat and the particular restlessness of a city in summer, and it also brought, quietly and without announcement, the thing Elena had been working toward in the way of someone who has learned to not look directly at what they want until they're close enough to reach it. She found an apartment. It wasn't much. A one-bedroom on the third floor of a building on Callaway Street, 15 minutes from the Sheen firm, 20 from Crestwood Drive. The building was clean, and the neighborhood was the kind of working city neighborhood where people knew their neighbors' first names, and the corner bodega had been there for 30 years and was planning to stay. The apartment had a kitchen with all 4 burners functional, a bathroom without drama, and a window in the bedroom that faced east and would get morning light. She stood in it on a Thursday evening after work, in the empty rooms that smelled like fresh paint and someone else's history, and she felt 2 things simultaneously and didn't try to resolve them into one. She felt the particular satisfaction of a thing earned, an address that was hers, a door with her name on the lease, the foundation of the thing she'd been building since December, and she felt the ache of a decision that was the right one and still cost something. She called Landon from the parking lot. "I found an apartment," she said. Silence. Not long. "Where?" "Callaway Street, 3rd floor. It has east windows." "When?" "August 1st. That gives me 2 weeks to—" "Okay," he said. "Landon." "I know," he said. "It's good, Elena. It's what you've been working toward." "Are you—" "I'm fine." A pause. I'm proud of you. I'm aware of how that sounds, and I mean it in the least condescending way possible." She leaned against her car. The summer evening was still and warm, and the parking lot was quiet. "I'm not moving to another city," she said. "Callaway is 20 minutes from your house." "I know where Callaway is. I'm just saying I'm not going anywhere." "I know." Another pause, and this one was different. The kind that holds something being decided rather than something being withheld. "Can I come see it? The apartment?" "Right now?" "Tomorrow. After work." She looked at the building, the 3rd floor window. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, you can." He came the next evening. He stood in the empty rooms and looked at the east window and the kitchen and the bathroom without drama. And he said it was a good apartment, and she said she thought so too. And they stood in the empty living room with the sounds of the building around them. Someone cooking below. A television through a wall, the particular sound of a place that was inhabited and alive. And it was one of those moments that means something specific that you won't understand the full weight of until later. "How do you feel?" he asked. She thought about it. "Like I did something," she said. "Like I actually did it." He nodded. "That's the thing about doing it yourself," she said. "It doesn't feel like relief. It feels like—" She looked for it. "Evidence. Evidence that you're the person you thought you were before everything fell apart." He looked at her. And she looked at him. And there was the particular silence of 2 people who have been moving toward each other across a long and difficult distance, and can now see that the distance is smaller than it was. She moved in on the 1st of August. Noah cried. He didn't cry loudly or dramatically. He did it the way he did most hard things, quietly and in control, his face very still, while his eyes did what they needed to do. They were standing in the entryway of the Crestwood house, her bags at her feet, the brown paper book in her hand because she hadn't packed it with the other books. She'd carried it separately. "You're not going far," she told him. "I know," he said. 20 minutes. "I'm going to see you." "I know," he said again. He knew all the logical things. He also knew that something was changing, and he was 8, and change was loss-shaped even when it wasn't actually loss, and he was a child who felt the shapes of things very precisely. She put the book down and crouched to his level and looked at him straight. "Hey," she said. "Look at me." He did. "I need you to hear this. I'm not your mom. I know I'm not. And I'm not trying to be." She paused. "But I love you. Okay? That's a real thing. It doesn't live in the house. It goes with me. You understand?" His chin did the thing chins do when you're 8 and working very hard at not crying harder. "Okay," he said. "I'll pick you up Tuesday." "Library?" "Library." He nodded. He picked up one of her bags and carried it to the car with a dignity that was completely out of proportion to his size, and she watched him do it and thought about the brown paper wrapping and the masking tape and the handwriting that said, "Because you get it." Landon was loading the car. He was doing it efficiently, with the focused, practical energy of someone who needed something to do with his hands. She understood. She had the same need sometimes. When the car was loaded, he stood by the driver's side. "I'll follow you over," he said. "Help carry things up." "You don't—" "Elena." She stopped. "Let me carry the boxes," he said. "That's all I'm asking. Let me carry the boxes." She got in the car. He followed her to Calloway Street and carried the boxes up 3 flights without complaint, including the one that was heavier than either of them had anticipated because it turned out she'd acquired more books than she'd accounted for. He made 2 trips while she started opening boxes, and when he came back up the second time, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the apartment with the boxes and her things beginning to inhabit the space. "It's going to be good," he said. "Yeah," she said. "I think so." He put his hands in his pockets. He looked at the east window. The late afternoon light was coming through it at a specific slant that made the empty room look like a painting of itself. "Elena," he said. She looked at him. "I've been patient," he said. "I'm going to keep being patient, but I want to say something." "Okay." "I fell in love with you," he said. "I don't know exactly when, somewhere between the soup and the crackers in the hallway at 2 a.m. and every conversation at the kitchen table. I'm not saying it to pressure you. I'm saying it because I said I was tired of not saying the true thing, and that's still true." He paused. "You don't have to say anything back. I just want you to have it. As a fact you can do what you want with." The apartment around them was empty and quiet and smelled like paint and possibility. And she was standing in it with a man who had driven her here and carried her boxes and was telling her the truth without asking for anything in return. She set down the book she'd been holding. She crossed the room. She did something she hadn't done, hadn't let herself do. In all the months and all the evenings and all the silences at the kitchen table, she stepped into him, into the specific warmth of someone who had been there all along, and she put her head against his shoulder and she just stayed there. For a moment. A real moment, not a polite one. His arms came up around her slowly, like someone who wasn't sure of the permission and was being careful not to assume. She felt him exhale, long and quiet, the particular release of someone who has been holding something for a long time. "I'm not saying nothing back," she said into his shoulder. I'm saying it differently." "I know," he said. "I need the apartment to be real first. I need to live in it. I need to make my own coffee in my own kitchen and pay my own rent and have my own door." "I know." And then she lifted her head, looked at him. Up close, in the August light, he looked tired and certain and exactly like himself. Not perfect, not what she'd have designed if she'd been designing anything, but real in the way that matters. "And then I'll have things to bring to this, not just need. I'll have something that's mine. And then we'll figure out what it is." He looked at her. "Deal," he said. She stepped back. She picked up the book. "Help me unpack the kitchen," she said. "You have a lot of opinions about where things go," he said, moving to the first box. "I know this already. I have appropriate opinions about kitchen organization. You told Mrs. Hendricks that her spice system was well-intentioned but architecturally flawed. I stand by that." He opened a box. She opened another. They unpacked her kitchen on the 1st of August in the apartment on Calloway Street, arguing about the correct placement of things with the ease of 2 people who had been arguing about small things for months as a way of not arguing about the large ones. And the east window let in the late light, and the building made its building sounds around them, and it was imperfect and real and enough. He left at 8. Noah texted at 8:15. "Is the apartment good?" She replied, "Yes." He replied, "Good." "Library is Tuesday." She replied, "Library is Tuesday." She made her bed. She put the brown paper book on the nightstand because it went there. It always went there. She stood at the east window in the August dark and looked at her street, her block, her view. In the morning, she would make coffee in her kitchen. She would go to work. She would come home to her apartment. She would, on Tuesday, go to the library with a boy who thought about things deeply. And on some evening she hadn't scheduled yet, she would sit across a table from a man who had told her the truth and waited, and they would begin the next part of whatever this was. She wasn't there yet. She was closer than she'd ever been to yet. She turned off the light. She lay in her own bed in her own apartment and listened to the building around her. The sounds of other people living, other kitchens, other conversations coming through the walls, muffled and warm. The particular sound of a place that is inhabited by people who are trying, in their various ways, to get through their lives. She thought about asking for someone's leftovers in a quiet cafe in November, standing on the outside of a thing she couldn't get into. She thought about the specific courage of walking toward humiliation because hunger was worse than pride. She thought about the soup and the corner table and the plastic bag she'd kept between her feet so she could feel it, and the book wrapped in brown paper by small, careful hands. She thought about the notebook. She should write something in it tonight. She would, in a minute. But first she just lay there and let the night be what it was, ordinary, imperfect, hers. And she thought that this specific ordinary, imperfect thing was what she'd been working toward all along. Not the grand version of herself she'd once imagined, just the real one. The one who could lose everything and find her way back to something true. Her phone buzzed once. Landon. Good night. She looked at it. She smiled at her phone in the dark of her own room, like a person who is allowed to smile. She wrote back, "Good night." She put the phone face down. She closed her eyes. Outside, Westbridge did its nighttime things. Traffic thinning, the bodega on the corner still lit, someone's music fading in and then out, the city breathing through its own particular rhythms. And she was inside it, part of it, located in it in a way she hadn't been in a long time. She slept well that night, better than she had in almost a year. The east window did what she'd hoped it would do. Every morning through August and into September, the light came through it at exactly the angle she'd calculated when she'd stood in the empty apartment in July. That particular low, angled, unambiguous morning light that fell across the kitchen counter and made the ordinary objects on it look like they'd been placed there deliberately. The coffee mug. The small cactus Noah had given her as a housewarming gift because, he'd explained with great seriousness, cactuses didn't need much to survive, and that seemed relevant. The notebook, which she'd taken to leaving on the counter in the mornings because she wrote in it over coffee now, a habit that had replaced the 10-minute grief ritual she'd been running since the worst of it. She was not the same person who had stood outside Birch and Bloom in November trying to decide whether her pride was worth more than her hunger. She was not the same person who had carried a plastic bag like a lifeline and sat on a step in December shaking in a jacket that wasn't built for the cold. She was not that person, and she did not try to pretend she was, because there was nothing useful in performing a continuity of suffering when the suffering had in fact changed. But she also was that person, in the way you always are the person you were at your lowest, not trapped there, but shaped by it. The specificity of knowing what it costs to ask a stranger for food. The particular education of carrying everything you own in one bag. These things don't leave you when your circumstances improve. They just relocate, move from the front of the house to the foundation, become part of what holds you up rather than what weighs you down. She had been thinking about this more deliberately since August, since the apartment, since the shift that had happened between her and Landon in the empty living room where she'd let herself stand close to him and mean it. She'd been thinking about what to do with what she knew. The idea arrived the way ideas that are actually right tend to arrive. Not as inspiration, not as a bolt of clarity, but as something that had clearly been building in the background for a long time and finally stepped into the light because she'd created enough stillness to see it. She was at the Sheen firm on a Wednesday in September, reviewing quarterly reports for a small restaurant group that Patricia had given her to manage independently. This was a promotion in function, if not yet in title, and Elena was aware of both the trust in it and the gap she was working to close. And she found herself thinking about the logistics company where she'd done temp work in January, about the people she'd sat next to in those data entry rows, about the woman 2 seats over who had mentioned she was living out of her car and was trying to line up 3 temp gigs simultaneously to cover first and last month's rent, about the particular math of poverty, the way it compounds, the way every system designed to help you out of it requires you to already have things you don't have, an address for job applications, a phone for callbacks, clean clothes for interviews, internet access for everything. She knew that math. She'd lived inside it. She opened a new document on her computer and started writing, And she did not stop until Patricia knocked on her office door at 6:15 to let her know she was the last one in the building. She looked up. She'd written 9 pages. "Go home, Elena," Patricia said, not unkindly. "Can I ask you something first?" Patricia leaned in the doorway. She was 60 years old and had started her own firm at 42 after a career in corporate accounting that she described as well-compensated and spiritually arid, and she had a particular quality of listening that made you feel like the thing you were saying was being actually received rather than just waited out. Elena told her about the idea. Not polished. It wasn't polished. It was 9 pages of a woman who had lived a thing trying to think practically about how to make it less terrible for the next person. She talked about the specific gaps, the logistical ones, the way the systems failed not through malice, but through a structural assumption that the people who needed them had resources they didn't have. She talked about what she'd needed and when she'd needed it and what would have changed if it had existed. Patricia listened. When Elena stopped, Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You know this takes money," she said. "Real money, not good intentions money." "I know." "Do you know anyone with real money?" Elena looked at her. Patricia looked back. "I'll be in my office another 20 minutes, Patricia said, and left. She called Landon from the parking lot. This had become her version of a standing ritual. The parking lot call, the thing said from the specific privacy of being between the workspace and the home space, in the brief liminal stretch where both were true and neither was. "I have an idea," she said when he picked up. "Tell me." So she did. Standing in the September parking lot with her 9 pages in her hand and the evening air carrying the first real hint of fall, she told him what she'd been thinking, what she'd been building in the background without fully naming it, what she now understood she'd been preparing for since the moment Patricia Sheen had said, "You already know how," and she'd understood that knowing how was only the first part of the obligation. He was quiet for a moment when she finished. "A resource center," he said, "not a shelter. Not a shelter. Shelters do what shelters do, and that matters. This is different. This is the bridge between crisis and functional, the part nobody funds because it's not dramatic enough. It's not emergency beds, it's job placement infrastructure. Interview clothes you can actually keep. Address services for applications. Skills certification programs with real job pipelines at the end." She paused. "The things I needed that I didn't have." "How long have you been thinking about this?" "Consciously? Since Wednesday. Actually, since January at least." Another silence. She'd learned to wait out his silences because they were not the silences of disengagement, but of actual processing. "I want to read the 9 pages, he said. "They're rough." "I want to read them." She sent them that night. He read them, she knew, because he texted her at 11:15. The section on address services is the most important part. Most people miss that one. She had been awake. She was always awake at 11:15, the habit of months of uncertain sleep. And she read it and wrote back, "I know, it's where everything else breaks down first." He wrote, "Let's talk this week. Properly." She wrote, "Yes." They talked properly on a Thursday evening. Not at the apartment. At Birch and Bloom, which felt right in a way neither of them mentioned, but both of them felt. The corner table. The soup. Derek, who had by now achieved the specific familiarity of someone who has witnessed a thing unfold over many months without being part of it, brought coffee without being asked and left them to it. Landon had printed the 9 pages. He'd made notes in the margins. She looked at the notes and felt the particular moved quality of someone whose work has been taken seriously. "The funding model needs work," he said. "The program design is good. The funding model is what every first-time founder gets wrong." "I know. I'm not a founder. I'm an accountant." "You're someone who lived this and then built a working model in 9 pages. That's more than most founders have after 9 months. He tapped the pages. "The funding model we can fix. The thing you can't manufacture is the knowledge base. You have that." "We," she said. He looked at her. "You said the funding model we can fix." She held his gaze. "I want to know if you mean that." "Yes," he said, without equivocating, without the soft language people use when they want to leave an exit. Just yes. "I'm not looking for someone to fund a project I made," she said. "I'm looking for a partner. That means I have actual authority over the program structure. The mission doesn't get diluted because the money has opinions. I agree with that. I mean it, Landon. I've seen enough nonprofits that started with a good idea and got turned into something else by the people who wrote the checks. So have I, he said. I've written some of those checks. It wasn't good. He set the pages down. What you're describing, the program structure is yours. The mission is yours. I'm the capital and the network and the board structure, and I stay in my lane. She looked at him. You really mean that, she said. I really mean that. She looked at the soup. She thought about 9 pages written in a state of something she could only describe as finally, as the release that comes from understanding what all the preceding experience was for. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They spent the next 4 months building it. This was not a movie version of building something. It was the actual version, which involved arguments about legal structure and grant language, and the specific taxonomy of organizational hierarchy, and one genuinely bad week in November, when the initial fiscal sponsor they'd lined up backed out for reasons that were mostly political and completely avoidable, and Elena sat in her apartment kitchen at midnight looking at spreadsheets and thought very clearly about giving up before deciding, also clearly, that she wasn't going to. She called Landon at 12:30. The Hartley Foundation pulled out, she said. I know. Marcus called me an hour ago. Why didn't you call me? Because I was finding a replacement and I wanted to have one before I called you. She was quiet for a moment. Did you? Almost. There's a family foundation on the east side that's been looking for exactly this kind of program. I have a meeting Monday, if you want to come. I'm coming. I thought you might say that. She did go. She sat in the meeting with the Alderman Family Foundation, and she talked about the program the way she could only talk about it. From the inside, from the knowledge of someone who had stood on the outside of every door this program was designed to open. The program director, a woman named Grace Alderman, who had the specific quality of someone who could hear the difference between performance and testimony, listened without interrupting for 40 minutes. At the end, she said, "When do you want to open?" The Westbridge Resource and Opportunity Center, WROC, which Noah immediately and persistently pronounced ROC, opened on the 2nd of April, 14 months after Elena had written 9 pages in a state of finally and sent them to a man in a parking lot at 9 in the evening. It was not a grand opening in the ribbon-cutting sense. There was no ribbon. There was a room with tables and good light. Elena had been specific about the light, had visited the space 7 times at different hours before signing the lease, because she knew from experience that the quality of light in a room communicates whether the room thinks you're worth its effort. And there were 3 staff members, a small advisory board, a working database of job placement partners, and a certification program that on its first day had 11 enrolled participants. Elena stood in the room that morning before anyone else arrived. She stood in the good light and looked at the tables and the chairs and the whiteboard on the wall where someone had written "Welcome" in large, careful letters. And she thought about a plastic bag and a dirty step and a jacket that wasn't built for December. And she did not cry, because she was not a person who performed her emotions for an empty room, but she felt something that was large and quiet and entirely her own. Noah came to the opening with Landon. He was 9 now, had turned 9 in March, and he'd been following the development of the project with the same serious engagement he applied to everything that mattered to him, asking questions at dinner about organizational structure and grant funding and job placement rates that suggested he was either going to be a nonprofit director or a very unusual economist. He walked around the room with his hands in his pockets. "It's good," he said. "You sound surprised," Elena said. "I'm not surprised. I just wanted to check." He stopped at the whiteboard. "Who's coming today?" 11 people for the certification program, and we're doing intake for job placement support. I'm not sure how many. Are they like, he looked for the word, like how you were? She looked at him. Some of them, yes. He nodded slowly. He looked at the room the way he looked at books when he was deciding if he trusted them, with a specific assessing attention that was entirely his own. "I think it'll help," he said. And coming from Noah, who did not say things to be kind but said them when he meant them, this landed the way it was intended. Landon was by the window, talking with Grace Alderman, who had become a steady presence in the project's development in the way that the right people sometimes do when the right thing is being built. He caught Elena's eye across the room. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She had become good at reading him over the past year and a half. The way you become fluent in something by living inside it. She knew his silences and his tells, and the particular way his expression moved when something mattered to him, but he wasn't going to make a show of it. She knew which situations put his shoulders up and which ones let them down. She knew that he checked on Noah twice a night, still, without fail, and she knew that the photo of Sarah was still on his desk and should be and always would be, because loving people who are gone is not a problem to be resolved, but a fact of being someone who loved. She knew that he was, in his imperfect and sometimes sealed off and often overthinking way, one of the good ones. Not because he'd given her a roof or funded a program or carried her boxes up 3 flights. Because he'd sat down next to her on a dirty step in December and not said anything, just sat there, which was the thing she'd needed and the thing he'd somehow known how to give. Their relationship had not been a clean arc. It was messier than that. 2 people who had both been broken in different ways, trying to figure out how much of themselves to offer and when. The hesitations and the miscommunications, and the one genuine argument in February when she'd felt, briefly and specifically, that he was making decisions about the foundation structure without consulting her, and had said so directly. And he'd gotten defensive in the way of someone who knows they're in the wrong, but is still traveling toward acknowledging it. And they'd sat on opposite sides of the Callaway Street kitchen at 10 in the evening until he'd said, "You're right, and I did it wrong, and I'm sorry." With the directness of someone who had decided to stop protecting his ego, and she'd said, "Thank you," and they'd talked it through and come out on the other side of it more solid than before. That was the truth of it. Not the smooth version, the actual version, with friction and repair, and the ongoing work of 2 people deciding, repeatedly, to be honest with each other even when honesty was uncomfortable. He asked her to marry him on a Saturday in June, 15 months after she'd moved to Callaway Street. Not at a restaurant, not with a planned speech. They were at her apartment, the east window doing its afternoon thing, Noah at a friend's house for the first time in months, because he'd finally, gradually, carefully let someone in at school. A boy named Theo, who shared his opinions about books and his distrust of unnecessarily spicy food. They were sitting on the couch, her feet up, some documentary about ocean systems on the television that neither of them was fully watching, and he said, in the middle of it, without architecture or ceremony, "I want to marry you." She looked at him. "I'm not asking because it's the next thing on a list," he said. "I'm asking because I've thought about it for a long time and I can't come up with a single reason it's wrong." "You've thought about it for a long time," she said, "since approximately March of last year. That's 14 months. "I'm patient," he said. "You asked me to be." She looked at the east window. The afternoon light came through it at its specific angle and lay across the floor in a shape that was different every hour, always moving, never the same twice. She thought about the version of herself who had stood outside a cafe with a plastic bag on her wrist, trying to figure out how to ask a stranger for his leftovers. That woman had been brave in a way that didn't look like bravery, which is the most common and most necessary kind. She'd had nothing, and she'd kept going anyway, because stopping wasn't an option, and the thing about not stopping is that eventually you get somewhere, even when you can't see where that is from where you're standing. She had gotten somewhere. She had gotten to this, an apartment with East Light, a job she'd earned, a program she'd built, a boy who read carefully and thought about broken things, and a man on her couch who had waited 14 months and was watching her with the expression of someone who will wait longer if that's what's needed, but is hoping it's not. "Yes," she said. He let out a breath. "That's it?" he said. "What did you want? A speech?" "I don't know. Something." "Yes is something. Yes is the whole thing." She looked at him. "Yes." They got married in October, which was Landon's suggestion, and Noah's strong endorsement on the grounds that October had the best weather, and also he wanted to wear the jacket he'd gotten for his school concert and hadn't had a reason to wear since. The ceremony was small. Carla, who had become something Elena would not have predicted in February of the previous year, which was a genuine friend, Patricia Sheen, Grace Alderman, A handful of people from the WROC who had been there since the beginning. Daniel Ashcroft, who had flown in from Phoenix and shaken Elena's hand at the door with the specific expression of a man who has been wrong about something and has done the work of knowing it. Noah stood next to his father at the front of the room and did not cry, which he had privately told Elena he was worried about. I might cry, and I don't want to cry in front of people. And she had told him that crying in front of people when something mattered was one of the braver things a person could do. And he'd thought about it and said, maybe, in the tone of someone who wasn't committing to it but was filing it for consideration. He did cry, briefly, during the vows. He recovered quickly and looked away and straightened his jacket and was fine. The WROC completed its first full year in April, 2 years after Elena had written 9 pages in a state of finally. 47 people had gone through the job placement program. 31 were employed in positions that matched or exceeded their skill level. 11 had completed certification programs. 6 had used the address service to secure housing they would otherwise have been unable to apply for. The numbers were not large in the way that makes headlines. They were large in the way that matters, which is that they represented specific people with specific names who were somewhere different than they would have been. Elena knew some of their stories, not all of them. She was not the caseworker, she was the director, and she'd learned to hold the appropriate professional distance while also understanding that the appropriate professional distance was something she could always collapse in a moment if a situation called for it, because she had the rare advantage of knowing exactly what it felt like to be on the other side of the desk. One afternoon in May, a woman came in for intake, 34 years old, had been in a shelter for 6 weeks, had a background in administrative work, lapsed, looking to rebuild. She sat across from the intake coordinator with her hands very still in her lap and answered questions with the careful economy of someone who has been asked to justify herself many times and has learned to do it efficiently. Elena, passing through, caught a look at her face. She recognized something in it, not the circumstances exactly. Everyone's circumstances were different. That was the thing people missed. They thought poverty was one story, but it was 10,000 different ones. What she recognized was the quality of the expression, the specific combination of exhaustion and determination, and the particular pride of someone who was sitting in a chair that required swallowing pride to sit in. She stopped at the coordinator's desk. "I'm Elena," she said to the woman. "I run this place." The woman looked up, cautious, assessing the way you learn to assess. "Do you have a few minutes after this?" Elena asked. "I'd like to hear more about your background, specifically the administrative work." The woman looked at her. "Okay," she said, carefully, not yet trusting it. "It's fine to be careful," Elena said. "Take your time." She went back to her office. She sat at her desk and looked at the window. This one faced west, not east, but the afternoon light came through it warmly. And she thought about a Tuesday in November, a cafe on the corner of Alderman and Fifth, a man reading a railroad biography he wasn't absorbing, and the particular courage of walking towards something that might say no. She thought about what it had cost him to say yes instead. Not money. The money was the easy part. She'd understood that even then, even sitting across from him over soup, that what he'd actually given her was the more difficult thing, the willingness to see a person rather than a situation, to make room for someone the world had decided to stop making room for. She thought about what she owed that. Not gratitude. She'd paid that back in every way available to her, and they both knew it, and neither of them tracked it anymore because you stop keeping score when you're actually a family. What she owed it was forward motion. The obligation of someone who had been given a second chance was not to feel perpetually thankful, but to build something real with it, and then, and this was the part people forgot, pass the door back open for whoever was standing outside it next. She was passing it back open. That was the thing she hadn't fully understood when she'd written 9 pages in September, that it wasn't charity, and it wasn't mission, and it wasn't even the version of gratitude people like to perform. It was just the recognition that the cafe had 2 sides, the inside and the outside, and that where you stood depended on so many factors that had nothing to do with your worth as a person, and that the most meaningful thing you could do with the knowledge of both sides was to make the door easier to find. Landon understood this better with each passing month. He'd come to the WROC on a Thursday and sit in the back and watch the certification sessions, Not with the look of a donor surveying his investment, but with the look of someone learning something he hadn't expected to need to know. He'd started talking differently in his board meetings. She'd heard this secondhand from Marcus, his Marcus, who'd been surprised by it. Less about scale and efficiency, more about the specific human cost of specific gaps. He was not a converted man. He was a man who had been changed by proximity to the truth, which was slower and more permanent than conversion. Noah, at 10, announced that he wanted to be either a writer or someone who fixed things that were broken in cities. He had not decided which. "You could do both," Elena told him. "Can you?" "Some people do." He thought about it. "What are you?" "I'm someone who was broken for a while and then fixed some things." She paused. "In that order." "I think that was the right order." He nodded, filing it. There was an evening in November, 2 years, almost to the day, from the evening Landon had found her on that step outside Birch and Bloom, when the three of them were in the Crestwood kitchen. Landon was making pasta. The same pasta, the tube things with the stuff, the one he'd been making for years, the garlic still occasionally getting away from him. Noah was at the table doing homework with the same theatrical suffering he had always brought to homework, and presumably always would. Elena was standing at the counter watching the sauce and thinking about nothing in particular, which was itself a thing that still struck her sometimes. The ability to think about nothing, the luxury of an ordinary evening, the profound unremarkableness of being home. "You're doing the thing," Landon said. She looked at him. "What thing?" "The thing where you get very still and look at the wall." "I was looking at the sauce." "You were looking through the sauce." She turned back to it and stirred. "I was thinking about how normal this is." "The pasta?" "Everything." She gestured slightly, broadly, at the kitchen, the table, the boy with the homework, the garlic that was not yet burning. "All of it." He looked at her. "Good normal or bad normal?" "The best normal," she said. "The kind you only appreciate if you know what the other kind is." He turned back to the stove. Noah looked up from his homework. "Are you two going to have a moment? Because I'm trying to concentrate." "Do your homework," Landon said. "I am doing my homework. I'm also monitoring the emotional temperature of the room, which is very high right now." "Homework," Elena said. He went back to it, but the corner of his mouth was doing something. The garlic did not burn that night. The pasta was exactly what it always was. Not remarkable, not a dish anyone would write about, but the specific comfort of a thing made with some care and eaten by people who were glad to be together. They ate at the kitchen table, and Noah talked and Landon listened, and Elena looked at them both across the plates and the ordinary clutter of an ordinary dinner and felt the thing she always felt in these moments. The thing she'd written about in the notebook until the notebook was full and she'd had to buy a new one. Not happiness, exactly. Or not only happiness, something more durable than happiness. Something that was made of the specific knowledge of the alternative. The knowledge that nothing about this was guaranteed, that it had been assembled carefully from pieces that could easily have gone differently, that the distance between the step outside the cafe and this kitchen table was both very short and almost impossibly long, and that the distance had been crossed by small decisions: a pulled-out chair, a clean meal instead of leftovers, a step taken down from a set of stairs, a hand offered on a dirty step in December. Small decisions, compounded. That was the whole thing. That was what she knew now that she hadn't known before, not as a lesson, because life doesn't deliver lessons on a clean plate, but as something she'd earned the hard way and intended to spend carefully. The scale of a life doesn't get changed by large gestures. It gets changed by small ones, made consistently in the direction of the person in front of you. She had been the person in front of someone. She was now, in her various capacities, wife, director, mother in the way that doesn't require biology, but requires everything else, in front of other people. She intended to stay there. The notebook on the Callaway Street counter, she kept the apartment, had turned it into her office when they'd formalized the move to Crestwood, because she needed a place that was hers in that specific way, that had her name on it, and her east window and her cactus that was still alive, because it turned out cactuses were genuinely resilient. That notebook had an entry from the night before, written in the specific early morning hour when she did her best thinking. "I think the whole story is about the door," she'd written. Who holds it open and who walks through it, and how you remember, once you're on the inside, what it felt like to stand on the other side. The memory is the responsibility. You carry it so it carries you somewhere useful. She closed the notebook. She made coffee. The east window let in the morning. She went to work.